In the quiet corners of ancient Greece, where the whispers of gods and mortals still echo through the ages, the story of Theseus unfolds, an epic tale of bravery, destiny, and the path to heroism. Theseus, son of Aegeus, the king of Athens, and Aethra, a mortal princess, was destined to become one of the greatest heroes of his time. His life would be shaped by challenges that tested his strength, wit, and courage, each moment leading him closer to his legacy. From slaying monsters to navigating labyrinths, Theseus's journey is marked by both triumph and tragedy, as he confronts the forces of fate and learns the true weight of his choices. His story is one of deep reflection, a reminder that even the greatest of heroes are bound by the threads of destiny. As you listen to the tale of Theseus, let the calm flow of his journey guide you into a peaceful slumber. May the rhythm of the ancient world, filled with gods, monsters, and dreams, lead you to rest. If you enjoy this tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share where you are watching from. Let the quiet strength of Theseus accompany you as the heroes of the past fade gently into sleep. The story of Theseus begins long before his feet touched the soil of Athens. His birth was the result of divine intervention, a tale as intricate as the labyrinth itself. His father, Aegeus, the king of Athens, was without an heir, and his heart longed for a child to carry on his legacy. In desperation, he sought the guidance of the oracle at Delphi, but the prophecy was veiled in mystery, offering only a cryptic warning. Do not untie the wineskin's mouth until you return home. Distraught, Aegeus returned to his home, but fate had another plan. In the city of Troezen, a distant land far from Athens, Aegeus met a woman named Aethra. Their union, both divine and mortal, resulted in the birth of a child, Theseus. Unbeknownst to Aethra, the god Poseidon too had visited her that same night, and thus Theseus was born both of divine and royal blood, son of Aegeus, the mortal king, and Poseidon, the god of the sea. To ensure his future, Aegeus left instructions for Aethra. The child, though still an infant, was to be raised in Troezen until he was old enough to lift a heavy stone, beneath which lay his inheritance, a sword and sandals, symbols of his royal birthright. And so, as the years passed, Theseus grew strong and wise, unaware of the great destiny that awaited him. With the knowledge of his divine and royal parentage, Theseus set out on a journey to Athens, a city whose fate would soon be entwined with his own. He had grown strong and wise in Troezen, raised by Aethra, unaware of his true heritage, until he was old enough to lift the heavy stone under which his father had hidden the tokens of his birthright, sandals and a sword. These were symbols of his heritage, meant to guide him on the path to Athens, and once he retrieved them, he knew it was time to begin his journey. Though he had the choice to take a safer route by sea, Theseus, full of youthful courage, chose the more dangerous path, through the land, where he would encounter creatures and villains that would test his mettle. To him, the road was not just a means of travel, but a trial, a rite of passage. Each step was not only toward Athens, but toward his destiny as a hero. As he walked through the lush hills of Greece, his first encounter was with Periphetes, a fearsome bandit who wielded a massive club and terrorized travelers. Known for his cruelty, Periphetes would ambush those who ventured too close, beating them senseless with his club. But Theseus, seeing this injustice, was not afraid. With the swiftness of a lion, he charged at Periphetes, catching the brigand off guard. A fierce struggle ensued, but Theseus was victorious, using the same club to strike down the bandit. This victory was no small feat, for it symbolized the strength that would define Theseus's journey, a hero unafraid to challenge evil in all its forms. Continuing on his path, Theseus came upon Sinis, known as the Pine Bender. This villain would capture travelers and tie them to the trunks of towering pine trees, bending them back until they snapped, hurling the unfortunate victims into the air. Like Periphetes, Sinis was a source of terror, his violence unchecked. But Theseus was not to be outwitted. He lured Sinis into a trap, using the same technique against him. With a swift pull of the ropes, Theseus sent Sinis flying into the sky, thus putting an end to his cruel deeds. Next, he encountered the infamous Sciron, another bandit who preyed upon travelers. Sciron would make his victims kneel before him, offering them the comfort of his hospitality. But when they did so, he would push them into the sea, where they were devoured by a giant turtle. Theseus, ever wary of deceit, approached Sciron cautiously. He knew that no kindness would be shown, so when the time came to kneel, Theseus flipped the bandit over his shoulder and into the sea, where Sciron met his end at the hands of his own monstrous turtle. The final bandit that Theseus would face on his journey was Procrustes, a cruel innkeeper with a twisted sense of justice. Procrustes would force travelers to lie down on an iron bed, cutting off or stretching their limbs to fit the bed's length. Theseus, using his sharp wit as much as his strength, tricked Procrustes into lying on his own bed. With one swift blow, he ended the villain's life and freed countless innocents from Procrustes' tyranny. With each villain slain, Theseus grew more confident, his reputation spreading across the land. No longer just a son of Aegeus, he was becoming the hero of Greece. His journey was one of both personal growth and the betterment of the world around him. But it was not only strength and courage that Theseus possessed, it was also wisdom, for he understood that true heroism lay not only in victory, but in the journey itself. Each step along the way, each challenge overcome, was part of a greater purpose, a purpose that was now guiding him toward Athens. Upon reaching the city gates of Athens, Theseus was met with a great celebration. Though his father Aegeus had not yet seen him, the people of Athens hailed him as a hero. His journey had made him a symbol of hope, and in the hearts of the Athenians, a new era seemed to dawn. However, even with these victories, Theseus's journey was far from over. The true test of his heroism was yet to come. For in the city of Athens, a darkness loomed, the terrible tribute to the Minotaur that demanded the sacrifice of young men and women. It was this cruelty, this blood price, that would bring Theseus face to face with his destiny. But before he could meet his father Aegeus and fulfill his birthright as the Prince of Athens, Theseus had to confront the truth of his own destiny. The challenges of the road were merely the beginning of a greater trial, one that would take him to the very heart of Crete, to the labyrinth where the Minotaur dwelled. The myth of Theseus was only beginning, and his greatest feat was yet to unfold. In the quiet of the night, as Theseus settled into the city that would become his home, the weight of his journey began to settle upon him. But within him there was a quiet confidence. He was not merely the son of a king, but a hero forged in the fires of adversity. And as the stars above Athens glimmered in the silent sky, the hero's path continued to beckon, leading him toward the challenges that would shape the rest of his life. The city of Athens had long been under the shadow of a cruel and terrifying ritual, one that demanded the sacrifice of the young to the monstrous Minotaur, a creature half man, half bull, who resided in the labyrinth on the island of Crete. Each year, as a tribute to King Minos of Crete, Athens was forced to send 7 young men and 7 young women to the island to face the beast. Theseus, knowing the toll this tribute took on his people, could not stand idly by. He swore an oath that he would end this cycle of death. The king of Athens, Aegeus, was reluctant at first to allow his son to join the ill-fated procession, knowing the danger that awaited in Crete's labyrinth. But Theseus, ever determined and courageous, insisted that it was his duty to free his city from this curse. With a heart full of resolve, he sailed with the other young Athenians to Crete, where their fates would be sealed by the terrible creature that lurked in the depths of the labyrinth. Upon reaching Crete, Theseus and his companions were taken to King Minos's court. The king, cold and impervious to the pleas of his subjects, welcomed the sacrifice as part of the tribute owed to him for the defeat of the Athenians in battle. Yet, Theseus, undeterred by the grim nature of the situation, entered the palace with a single thought in mind: to confront the beast and rid his homeland of this monstrous fate. In the court of Minos, Theseus caught the eye of the king's daughter, Ariadne, whose heart was torn by the cruelty of the Minotaur and the fate her father had imposed upon the Athenians. Ariadne, moved by the bravery of Theseus, vowed to help him. She knew the labyrinth's winding paths better than anyone, and she had a plan that might give Theseus a chance to survive. Ariadne gave him a gift, a ball of thread. She instructed him to tie one end of the thread to the entrance of the labyrinth and unravel it as he journeyed through its winding, maze-like halls. This would allow him to find his way out once the Minotaur had been slain. Grateful for her help and touched by her kindness, Theseus swore to return to her victorious and promised that his triumph would be her triumph as well. With the thread tied to the entrance, Theseus descended into the labyrinth. The dark corridors stretched endlessly before him, each turn more confusing than the last. But Theseus, ever resourceful and determined, pressed on, unraveling the thread as he went deeper into the maze. The air grew thicker with each step, heavy with the scent of the Minotaur, whose presence seemed to pulse through the walls. After what felt like an eternity of winding paths and dead ends, Theseus heard a terrible sound, a deep, guttural roar that echoed through the labyrinth's walls. The Minotaur, a creature of nightmares, was near, a beast of terrible size and strength, its half-human face twisted into a cruel expression, and its bull-like body rippled with muscle. Its eyes glowed with hunger, and its massive hooves thundered on the stone floors as it prowled the maze in search of prey. But Theseus did not hesitate. With the thread still guiding him, he followed the sound of the beast's movements, his heart steady with courage. As the Minotaur came into view, the hero's breath caught in his chest. The beast towered over him, its massive frame filling the narrow path of the labyrinth. But Theseus, armed only with his sword, was undaunted. He had trained for this moment his whole life. With a cry of defiance, he charged at the Minotaur, dodging its heavy blows and slashing at its tough hide. The battle was fierce. The Minotaur, though strong and savage, was no match for Theseus's speed and determination. The labyrinth itself seemed to hold its breath as the two combatants clashed. The walls echoed with the sounds of their struggle, flesh against steel, bone against muscle. For what felt like an eternity, Theseus fought with all his strength, until finally, with a well-placed strike, he drove his sword deep into the heart of the beast. The Minotaur let out a final blood-curdling roar, then crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Exhausted but victorious, Theseus took a moment to catch his breath. The monster that had haunted Athens for so long was dead, its terror vanquished by the courage of one man. But Theseus knew that his journey was not yet over. He had to find his way out of the labyrinth, and soon, for the lives of his companions and the promise he had made to Ariadne, were at stake. Following the thread, Theseus retraced his steps through the maze, his heart beating fast as he neared the entrance. He emerged into the light of day, where the people of Crete, who had gathered to witness the fate of the Athenians, saw the hero standing victorious, his sword stained with the blood of the Minotaur. The Athenians, overjoyed to see their people spared, hailed Theseus as a true hero. But Theseus's triumph was not just his own. He owed it to Ariadne, who had given him the thread that had led him through the maze. In her, he saw not only the kindness of a princess, but the courage of a woman who believed in him when no one else did. As he made his way to the shore to return to Athens, Theseus took Ariadne with him, planning to make her his bride. However, fate had other plans. Though Theseus had vanquished the Minotaur, the gods were not yet finished with him. A great tragedy awaited, one that would haunt the hero's journey for the rest of his life. After the heroic slaying of the Minotaur, Theseus and his companions sailed from Crete, their hearts light with the promise of victory and the hope of a safer future for Athens. The shadow of the Minotaur's terror had been lifted, and Theseus was now a celebrated hero, his name etched in the annals of history. But his journey was far from over, and his fate, though filled with glory, would soon be marked by a moment of deep sorrow. At the heart of his triumph was Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos. It was she who had given him the thread that guided him through the labyrinth, allowing him to overcome the monstrous Minotaur. Ariadne had fallen deeply in love with Theseus, and he, too, had felt a great affection for her. She had been a beacon of hope in the darkness of the maze, and Theseus, grateful for her help, promised to return to her, victorious. Together, they set sail from Crete, but as the ship made its way across the sea, fate took a cruel turn. They arrived at the island of Naxos, a place of beauty and isolation, where Theseus's heart faltered in a moment of indecision. While Ariadne slept, left vulnerable and unaware, Theseus made a choice that would echo through time, a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his days. The reasons for Theseus's abandonment of Ariadne remain a matter of mythic ambiguity. Some say that the gods, in their ceaseless games, had intervened, whispering into the hero's ear. Others suggest that Theseus, overwhelmed by the weight of his responsibilities to Athens and the path laid out before him, felt he could not bear the burden of a royal marriage. Regardless of the reason, the fact remained. Theseus left Ariadne on the shores of Naxos, alone and abandoned. When Ariadne awoke to find Theseus gone, her heart shattered. The island, once a place of hope and promise, now became a silent witness to her sorrow. She wandered the shores, calling out to Theseus, but there was no answer, only the waves and the wind. It is here that the story takes an unexpected twist. The god Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry, was drawn to Ariadne's grief. Moved by her beauty and her pain, Dionysus approached her on the lonely shores of Naxos. He offered her comfort and solace, and soon his love for her grew. Dionysus, in a show of divine intervention, made Ariadne his bride, and together they became an eternal pair, ruling over the realm of joy and celebration. Though Ariadne's new life with Dionysus was filled with love and divine favor, her heartbreak over Theseus's abandonment never fully healed. But in time, she came to accept her fate, and the gods ensured that she was honored for her role in Theseus's victory. The story of Ariadne, though marked by sorrow, became a tale of transformation, showing that even in loss, new beginnings could arise. As for Theseus, his decision to abandon Ariadne weighed heavily on him, though he would not fully understand the depth of his mistake until much later. For the loss of Ariadne was not the only tragedy that awaited him. Theseus continued on his journey back to Athens, filled with mixed emotions. His victory over the Minotaur and his newfound status as a hero were tempered by the guilt of leaving Ariadne behind. He sailed on, unaware of the heavy cost that awaited him. His true test, however, was yet to come, the fateful moment when he would make a grave mistake that would alter the course of his life forever. As Theseus neared the shores of Athens, he remembered the promise he had made to his father, King Aegeus. He had sworn that if he succeeded in defeating the Minotaur, he would return to Athens with white sails flying on his ship. This was a signal, a symbol of victory, and the hope that the hero had survived the perilous task. If, however, Theseus had failed, the sails would remain black. In his exhaustion and joy, Theseus forgot to change the sails before he set sail for Athens. His mind, clouded by the events of the journey, failed to carry out the simple yet vital task. His ship, with its black sails still hoisted, sailed toward the city. When King Aegeus, standing on the cliffs of Athens, saw the black sails on the horizon, his heart sank. Believing that his son had perished, Aegeus, overcome by grief, threw himself into the sea, ending his life. The tragic death of King Aegeus marked a turning point in Theseus's life. His return to Athens, once filled with promise, was now steeped in sorrow and loss. Though Theseus had slain the Minotaur and freed his people from a terrible curse, he had paid a heavy price, a price that could never be undone. In the quiet aftermath of Ariadne's abandonment and the death of his father, Theseus would find himself navigating a world forever, changed by his actions. The choices he made, driven by ambition, duty, and love, were not without consequence. The story of Theseus, like many great heroes, is a tale of triumphs and tragedies, of moments of greatness and sorrow, each woven into the fabric of time. As Theseus pondered the weight of his mistakes and the cost of his heroism, he was reminded of the powerful forces that shaped his journey. The gods, the labyrinth, the Minotaur, they were all parts of a greater plan, one that would continue to unfold as Theseus's path took him to new challenges and trials. But no matter where his journey would lead, the memory of Ariadne's love and the tragic loss of his father would remain with him always. After the tragic events on the island of Naxos, where Theseus had abandoned Ariadne, he continued his journey back to Athens with a heavy heart. The weight of the decisions he had made pressed upon him, yet he could not shake the sense of duty that urged him to return home. He had promised to deliver Athens from the terror of the Minotaur, and in that he had succeeded. But the path ahead was far from clear, and the consequences of his actions would soon unfold. As Theseus approached the shores of Athens, a sense of hope and relief filled his chest. He had accomplished the impossible. He had slain the Minotaur, freed his people, and become a hero in the eyes of the Athenians. He could already imagine the joyous celebrations that awaited him. However, there was one final act left to complete, the promise he had made to his father, King Aegeus. When Theseus set sail for Crete, he had sworn to Aegeus that if he returned victorious, he would signal his success by raising a white sail. A black sail would signal failure, but Theseus was certain of his triumph. With the Minotaur slain, the sacrifice of Athens' youth brought to an end, he had no doubt that his father would rejoice in his success. But in his excitement and the haze of victory, Theseus overlooked a simple yet vital task. He forgot to change the sails of his ship. As he sailed closer to Athens, Theseus's mind was clouded with thoughts of triumph. Not the small details that might seem insignificant but held great consequence. He failed to change the sails from black to white, an innocent mistake, one that was overlooked in the wake of his great achievement. It was a slip of the mind that would cost him dearly. From the cliffs of Athens, King Aegeus stood anxiously, his eyes searching the horizon for the signal of his son's return. He had been waiting for the sight of the white sails, the confirmation that Theseus had survived the labyrinth and emerged victorious. But as the ship drew nearer, Aegeus's heart sank. The sails, still black, signaled disaster. His son had failed. Believing Theseus had perished in the labyrinth, Aegeus was overcome by grief and despair. In a moment of anguish, he hurled himself into the sea, ending his life. The moment Theseus arrived in Athens, he was met with a sight that shattered his soul. The joyous cheers that had been building throughout the city turned into a mournful silence. The truth of his mistake was revealed too late. The black sails had condemned his father, and by the time Theseus learned of Aegeus's death, it was already too late to undo the damage. Devastation filled Theseus's heart. Though he had freed Athens from the terror of the Minotaur, he had lost his father in the process. The hero who had slain a monster and brought peace to his people now found himself alone, bearing the weight of his father's death on his conscience. His heart ached, not just for the loss of his father, but for the pain he had unknowingly caused. The loss of Aegeus marked a turning point in Theseus's life. Though he was still revered as a hero, the death of his father cast a shadow over his achievements. Theseus's triumphs, his slaying of the Minotaur, his victory over the monsters and brigands on the road to Athens, seemed small compared to the devastation he now faced. His return to Athens, once expected to be a time of great celebration, became a period of mourning. The city had lost its king, and the people who had once hailed Theseus as their savior now looked at him with mixed emotions, grief for the king and a silent question hanging in the air. Could Theseus truly claim the title of hero when his own actions had caused so much pain? Theseus, unable to shake the guilt that plagued him, withdrew from the public eye. For a time, he could not reconcile his past victories with the tragedy of his father's death. He was no longer just a hero of myth. He was a man burdened by the consequences of his own choices. In the quiet of Athens, Theseus found himself at a crossroads. His heroism had brought both light and darkness into his life. He had defeated monsters and freed his people, But the loss of Aegeus reminded him that even the greatest victories come with a price. The story of Theseus, like all stories of heroes, was now marked by both glory and sorrow. Though the weight of his father's death seemed impossible to bear, Theseus would eventually rise to face new challenges. His journey was far from over. In the years to come, he would confront new foes, face new trials, and attempt to rebuild the shattered pieces of his life. But no matter what lay ahead, the shadow of that one tragic mistake would follow him, always a reminder of how a single misstep could change the course of fate. In the wake of King Aegeus's tragic death, Theseus found himself not just a hero, but a king, a ruler of Athens, a city that had suffered deeply from both external foes and internal strife. The weight of the crown was heavy on Theseus's head, and though his heart still carried the burden of his mistakes, he knew that his path forward lay in restoring Athens to its former glory. The people of Athens, mourning the loss of their king, were hesitant at first to accept Theseus as their new ruler. The shadow of his father's death, tied to the hero's unintentional mistake with the black sails, loomed large over him. But Athens, in its grief and its need for stability, slowly began to accept Theseus's leadership. The people had seen him face monsters, defeat tyrants, and bring peace to their land. They knew that, despite the tragedy, he was the one who had the strength to lead them through troubled times. The first act of Theseus as king was to strengthen the unity of his city. He realized that Athens, divided and fractured in its leadership, would not stand strong against the challenges that lay ahead. His first great act of wisdom as a ruler was the formation of the Synoikismos, a unification of the various small towns of the region into a single, united city-state. Theseus brought together the villages of the surrounding land under one banner, creating a single, powerful Athens. This was no small task. The unification was met with resistance from many local leaders who feared losing their power and influence. Yet, Theseus, with his natural charisma and military prowess, managed to convince them of the strength that unity would bring. By uniting the towns and regions, Theseus forged a powerful Athens, one that would later become the heart of Greek civilization, a city known for its culture, philosophy, and democracy. But these great acts of leadership did not come without challenges. As Athens grew stronger, so did the envy of neighboring city-states. Many saw the rise of Athens as a threat to their own power, and soon Theseus found himself embroiled in new battles, not against monsters or myths, but against human enemies, other kings and city-states who sought to challenge Athens's growing dominance. One of Theseus's greatest military victories came when he led Athens into battle against Megara, a neighboring city-state. Megara, once an ally of Athens, had turned hostile, seeking to assert its own power. Theseus, though weary from the losses of his past, did not falter. He led his army with the precision of a seasoned general, and the battle was won decisively. This victory ensured Athens's dominance in the region, solidifying Theseus's rule and proving his ability as both a warrior and a statesman. Though these victories strengthened Athens, Theseus's heart remained heavy. The ghosts of his past, the loss of his father, the abandonment of Ariadne, haunted him. He had built a great city, but in his mind he was still the young man who had made the fateful mistake of leaving Ariadne behind, the hero who had caused the death of his father. His mind was often drawn to the question of whether he had truly earned the throne of Athens, whether he was truly worthy of the title of king. Theseus's reign, though marked by political and military success, was also defined by personal struggle. His sense of guilt over his past choices continued to shape his decisions. In his quieter moments, he would walk alone in the city he had rebuilt, contemplating the weight of his actions and the legacy he would leave. Though Athens thrived under his leadership, Theseus felt the sharp edge of regret every day. Despite his inner turmoil, Theseus sought to bring about the greatest possible good for his people. He worked tirelessly to promote the arts and culture, understanding that the prosperity of a civilization depended not just on strength, but on wisdom and creativity. Under his reign, Athens became a center for learning, philosophy, and the arts, laying the foundations for the great achievements that would follow in later centuries. Yet, as the years passed, the weight of the crown and the memories of his past misdeeds seemed to grow heavier. Theseus had brought peace to Athens, but at what cost? He often wondered if he had sacrificed too much along the way. The love of Ariadne, the bond with his father, the joy of living a simple life. The price of heroism, he now understood, was not just measured in battles won or cities built, but in the quiet sacrifices made in the heart. In time, Theseus would face more challenges. His kingdom, once united, began to fray at the edges. New threats arose from both within and without, and the city-state that he had worked so hard to build began to face the pressures of maintaining its power and identity. Theseus's reign, while triumphant, was not free from conflict or tragedy. But through it all, the hero remained steadfast, even as the shadow of his past loomed ever larger. And so, Theseus, the great hero of Athens, continued to lead his people with courage, wisdom, and a heart burdened by the weight of his own choices. His story, filled with both triumph and regret, continued to unfold, a tale of a man who sought to rebuild a kingdom, even as he struggled to rebuild his own soul. As time passed, Theseus's reign over Athens, though marked by both triumph and internal struggles, began to show signs of the weariness that comes with age and the heavy burden of leadership. The hero who had once faced monsters and gods, who had united a kingdom and shaped a city, found that even the mightiest of heroes cannot escape the inevitable pull of time. Though Athens thrived under his rule, Theseus's own life was nearing its twilight. Theseus, despite his political successes and his role in shaping the course of Athens, began to grow increasingly disillusioned. The memories of his past decisions, the abandonment of Ariadne, the death of his father, the countless battles were becoming harder to bear. His victories, once sources of great pride, now seemed distant and faded, like echoes of a time long past. There were those who believed that Theseus, now older and more reflective, had become disconnected from the city he had helped build. Athens, though still powerful, was no longer the youthful and vibrant city it had once been under his leadership. Discontent was beginning to brew in the hearts of some of Athens's citizens, and rival powers began to circle around the city-state, eager to challenge its position in the Greek world. It was during this time of political fragility that Theseus's fate took another turn. He had long ago left the paths of the labyrinth and the hero's journey behind him, but fate still had one last trial for him to face. Theseus's legacy, built on courage and strength, would be tested not by external enemies, but by the disintegration of his own resolve. In the midst of these growing tensions, Theseus made a decision that would change the course of his final days. Despite his best efforts to secure Athens' future, the city was faced with a growing power vacuum. His son, Demophon, whom Theseus had left behind in Athens during his early years of heroism, had grown into a man of his own. Though he had fought beside Theseus in the past, he was not prepared to take on the responsibility of ruling. Theseus, now old and weary, had little choice but to pass on his duties to his son. But in doing so, he faced the same challenge that had haunted him throughout his life: the uncertainty of whether the next generation could carry the burden he had borne. Theseus, feeling his end drawing near, left Athens for a time. He journeyed to the island of Skyros, seeking a final resting place far from the city he had once saved. It was here, on this isolated island, that Theseus's life would come to a tragic and unexpected end. The details of Theseus's death are shrouded in myth. Some accounts tell of betrayal at the hands of the ruler of Skyros, King Lycomedes, who, fearing Theseus's return to power, cast him off a cliff to his death. Others say that Theseus, old and frail, simply succumbed to the ravages of time. Regardless of the exact cause, Theseus's death marked the end of an era for Athens. The city had lost its greatest hero, and the world had lost a figure whose deeds had shaped the very foundation of Greek civilization. Theseus was buried on Skyros, and though his body was gone, his legacy lived on. The city of Athens, which had been made great through his leadership and heroism, would continue to thrive, though the shadow of his passing loomed large over its future. His story, though marked by personal loss and mistakes, would be remembered for centuries to come. Even in death, Theseus remained a figure of great importance. His role in the mythic stories of Greece, from slaying the Minotaur to uniting the lands of Attica, continued to resonate throughout the ages. He became not just a hero, but a symbol of the complexities of human nature: strength and vulnerability, courage and regret, greatness and failure. The duality of Theseus, the hero who could face gods and monsters, yet could not escape the frailties of human life, made him a figure of timeless appeal. In the years that followed, Theseus was immortalized in art, poetry, and myth. His journey was recounted again and again, his deeds becoming the foundation for future generations of heroes and storytellers. He was not simply a figure of ancient Greece. He became an archetype of the hero's journey, the man who faced unimaginable challenges and emerged victorious, only to be brought low by his own flaws and the passage of time. The legacy of Theseus is woven into the very fabric of Greek mythology. His name would live on alongside other great heroes: Heracles, Perseus, Achilles, each one embodying the virtues and the flaws that made them both human and divine. Theseus's story would inspire not only his contemporaries, but all who came after him, teaching that heroism is not a simple thing. It is a journey that spans triumph and failure, wisdom and folly, and the inescapable reality that even the greatest heroes must one day fade into legend. The death of Theseus marked the end of an era for Athens and the Greek world. Yet, as the hero's body was laid to rest on the island of Skyros, his spirit and his legacy lived on in ways that would shape the generations to come. For Theseus, though he was lost to the mortal world, had achieved something far beyond the immediate victories of his lifetime. He had carved a path that would inspire future heroes, not just through his deeds, but through the very complexities of his character. In the centuries that followed his death, Theseus was remembered not as a flawless champion, but as a hero whose greatness was intertwined with his flaws. His story, with its triumphs and tragedies, offered a powerful narrative about the nature of heroism itself, a theme that would resonate deeply in the culture of ancient Greece and continue to echo through Western literature and philosophy. At the heart of Theseus's legacy was his journey of self-discovery. Though born into greatness as the son of the Athenian king Aegeus and the mortal Aethra, Theseus's life was not one of inherited glory. He did not simply inherit his father's throne or his kingdom. He had to prove himself through his actions. His journey was not just physical, but deeply personal, a quest not only to defeat the Minotaur, but to understand his own identity and purpose. From the moment he lifted the stone to reveal the symbols of his royal heritage, Theseus set out on a quest that would see him facing monsters, bandits, and challenges that tested not only his physical strength, but his courage, wisdom, and moral character. Each trial he faced on his way to Athens was a metaphor for the internal struggles that would come to define him as a hero. Unlike other heroes, Theseus's tale was not one of constant victory. He was often filled with regret, uncertainty, and self-doubt. His tragic mistake with the black sails, his abandonment of Ariadne, and the unintentional death of his father revealed the dark side of heroism. Theseus, despite all his strength and wisdom, was still bound by human flaws. Flaws that made him more relatable and human to the generations who looked up to him. His story, therefore, was not one of unblemished glory, but of perseverance in the face of imperfection. In this way, Theseus became the archetype of the tragic hero. His flaws, his impulsive actions, his moments of recklessness, and his failures did not diminish his heroism. Rather, they made him more accessible. He was a figure who embodied the truth that greatness is often achieved not through the absence of failure, but through the ability to rise above it. The heroic ideal of Theseus was defined by his capacity to struggle, fail, and learn, rather than by a series of flawless victories. Through his heroic deeds, Theseus had changed the very fabric of Athens. He had united the city-states of Attica into one powerful entity, giving birth to the concept of Athenian democracy, a legacy that would later evolve into one of the most influential political systems in history. Theseus's unification of the Greek world set the stage for Athens's cultural and political dominance, which would last for centuries. But perhaps the most enduring aspect of Theseus's legacy was his connection to myth and culture. Even in his own time, the story of Theseus was one that inspired generations of Greeks. His slaying of the Minotaur, his trials with bandits, his journey through the labyrinth, these myths were woven into the collective identity of Greece. Theseus was not just a hero of Athens. He was a hero of all Greece, embodying the virtues and struggles that were shared by the Greek people as a whole. Beyond the shores of Athens, Theseus's influence reached across the Greek world. Writers, philosophers, and artists drew inspiration from his story, and his name became synonymous with the ideals of bravery, wisdom, and justice. The tale of Theseus was repeated in the literature of Greece and later Rome, and it became a foundational myth for the concept of the hero's journey, the cycle of adventure, struggle, and transformation that is a central theme in storytelling to this day. Ariadne, who had once been abandoned by Theseus, became an important part of his myth as well. Her love for him and her subsequent union with Dionysus turned her into a figure of transformation. In a sense, Ariadne's story was as much a part of Theseus's myth as his own. She too represented the complexity of love and loss, and her role in helping him slay the Minotaur ensured her place in the broader narrative of heroism. The image of Theseus continued to be celebrated in art and sculpture, most famously in the statues of Theseus, which depicted him as a figure of strength and nobility. His portrayal in these artistic forms was often idealized, but his story, one of both greatness and tragedy, remained at the core of his lasting appeal. Even after Athens' decline, the memory of Theseus lived on in the hearts of those who still sought the ideals that he represented. Yet, for all of his influence, the story of Theseus also spoke to the impermanence of human glory. His reign, like all things, would pass. The city he had built would change, as would the people he had once led. His story became a reminder that even the greatest heroes must eventually fade from the world. The world may change, and empires may rise and fall, but the myths, those eternal stories of heroism and human frailty, would endure. In the final analysis, Theseus's legacy was not simply a matter of heroic deeds or political victories. It was his humanity, his struggles, and his mistakes that made him a hero whose story would be told for centuries. His journey was a reflection of the heroic ideal, not as a quest for perfection, but as a journey for meaning and purpose in an imperfect world. Theseus, the hero of Athens, had left his mark on history, not just in the battles he won or the cities he unified, but in the hearts and minds of those who would remember him as more than just a figure of myth. He would be remembered as a symbol of human potential, of the possibility of greatness, even in the face of failure. Though Theseus's life and death marked the end of his own mortal journey, his legacy lived on in ways far beyond the shores of Athens. The story of the great hero, his trials, his triumphs, and his human flaws would ripple through the ages, leaving a lasting mark on the Greek world and beyond. The very idea of the hero, shaped by Theseus's life, would influence not only the generations of Greeks who came after him, but also the structure of myth and the archetype of the hero itself. The first and most significant legacy of Theseus was the influence of his heroic journey on the heroes who came after him. In his story, Theseus embodied the qualities that would become central to many future Greek myths: the hero's courage, intelligence, and his capacity to overcome overwhelming odds. But it was not simply Theseus's victories that would leave a mark. It was his mistakes and his humanity, his very imperfections, that would become a key part of the heroic tradition. One of the most direct heirs to Theseus's legacy was Heracles, known to the Romans as Hercules. Like Theseus, Heracles was a son of a god, the divine Zeus, and his tale was one of great feats and unimaginable challenges. However, it was Heracles' personal flaws, his moments of anger and impulsivity, that drew comparisons to Theseus. Heracles, too, was a hero who faced monsters, just as Theseus had fought the Minotaur, and undertook laborious tasks that tested his strength, his wit, and his resilience. Yet it was in their shared tragedy that Theseus and Heracles' legacies intertwined. Both heroes were haunted by their mistakes. Heracles, in a fit of madness caused by Hera, killed his own family, leading him to undertake the famous 12 labors in a quest for redemption. Similarly, Theseus, burdened by his past failures, had moments of self-doubt and regret. Theseus's tragic flaws, his abandonment of Ariadne, the death of his father, and his later disillusionment as a ruler, found echoes in the life of Heracles, whose own tragic actions made him both a hero and a figure of immense pathos. Another hero whose journey was influenced by Theseus was Perseus, the slayer of Medusa. Perseus, like Theseus, embarked on a quest that was guided by the gods. His was a divine mission to defeat the Gorgon. While their quests were different, Perseus's own journey bore striking similarities to Theseus's in the way both heroes navigated challenges. Both Perseus and Theseus faced terrifying monsters, yet the heart of their stories was not simply their victories, but how they managed their inner fears and doubts. In their bravery, both heroes exemplified the struggle between fate and free will, the tension between divine will and personal choice. But beyond individual heroes, Theseus's mythic journey influenced the very structure of myth itself. The template of the hero's journey, which Theseus's life followed, became a recurring motif throughout Greek mythology. Theseus's story, his divine parentage, his heroic deeds, his journey of self-discovery, his tragic mistakes, and his eventual legacy, was repeated and reinterpreted in the lives of countless other figures in the Greek mythological tradition. These stories followed a familiar arc: the hero's origin, the trials he faced, the moment of fallibility, and the eventual legacy that endures through art, song, and remembrance. The very concept of the hero as someone who is not perfect, who is capable of both extraordinary acts and profound failings, became central to Greek storytelling. This nuanced view of the hero would influence writers like Sophocles and Euripides, whose plays focused not just on the great deeds of men and women, but on the psychological and emotional toll those deeds exacted. The heroes of Greek tragedy, figures like Oedipus, Antigone, and Agamemnon, shared the same fatalistic struggles that Theseus himself faced, struggling with their past mistakes and the consequences of their actions. Even in the Roman era, the story of Theseus continued to be influential. Writers like Virgil in his epic Aeneid would look back to Theseus's mythic journey as a guide for their own heroes, including the Trojan prince Aeneas, whose journey is in many ways modeled on the trials of earlier Greek heroes. Aeneas, like Theseus, had to balance personal desires with duty and fate. The very notion of the hero embarking on an arduous journey for both personal and communal transformation had been established by Theseus's story and continued through the ages. In later works, including Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, the shadow of Theseus's influence looms large. Odysseus, in particular, shares many qualities with Theseus. Both men are celebrated for their intelligence, their cunning, and their ability to overcome obstacles. Yet, like Theseus, both characters are marked by their flaws. Odysseus's pride, which leads to his prolonged journey home, and Theseus's sense of ambition, which sometimes leads him to reckless decisions, show that even the greatest heroes are not without their weaknesses. The theme of heroic suffering, which runs throughout Theseus's myth, his abandonment of Ariadne, the loss of his father, the toll of leadership, became foundational to later heroic epics. It was understood that greatness was not achieved through perfection, but through the struggle between glory and grief, victory and loss, and the eternal quest to reconcile one's deeds with one's personal identity. In the philosophical works of Plato and Aristotle, the idea of the tragic hero, exemplified by Theseus, found a deeper resonance. Aristotle's concept of hamartia, the hero's fatal flaw, is seen in the very essence of Theseus's life. His arrogance, his overconfidence, his inability to foresee the consequences of his actions. Theseus's mistakes serve as a powerful reminder that no hero, no matter how noble or mighty, is exempt from the consequences of their own choices. Theseus's myth, as it evolved through the ages, did not remain static. It became a living, breathing part of the collective memory of Greece and beyond, informing not just future myths, but the development of art, literature, and philosophy. The lasting impact of Theseus, his successes and failures, his heroism and his flaws, made him a model for how myths could be constructed and how heroes could be celebrated for their humanity as much as for their strength. As Theseus's tale became one of the most enduring myths in Greek tradition, his image was captured and immortalized in many forms of art and culture. His journey from a heroic youth to a troubled king and tragic figure would inspire countless generations, shaping not only the mythology of his time, but also the cultural expressions of subsequent civilizations. In sculpture, Theseus was depicted as a figure of great strength and nobility. The ancient Greeks, who revered physical prowess and beauty, portrayed Theseus as the quintessential hero, muscular, determined, and often in motion, symbolizing both his courage and his tireless drive. The sculptors of the classical period used his form as a model of the perfect human physique, idealizing him as the embodiment of physical excellence. One of the most famous representations of Theseus can be seen in the Parthenon frieze, a monumental sculptural decoration that adorned the Temple of Athena in Athens. The frieze depicts the Athenian people, including heroes such as Theseus, engaged in the sacred Panathenaic procession. Here, Theseus was honored as a central figure in the founding of Athens, his mythic role in the unification of the city-state celebrated alongside the greatness of the goddess Athena. In this artistic context, Theseus was not just a hero of myth, but a symbol of Athens's greatness and the ideal of civic unity. Another famous representation is the Theseus and the Minotaur scene, which was frequently portrayed in vase paintings and relief sculptures. In these depictions, Theseus is shown in dramatic combat with the Minotaur, the half-man, half-bull creature that symbolized chaos and monstrosity. These scenes were not merely visual representations of a hero defeating a beast. They were a metaphor for the triumph of order over disorder, civilization over barbarism. In the myth of the Minotaur, Theseus's victory was not just the defeat of a physical adversary, but also the establishment of Athens as a bastion of rationality, intelligence, and order. The ancient Greek playwrights also played a pivotal role in keeping Theseus's story alive. Sophocles, one of the greatest dramatists of the 5th century BCE, incorporated Theseus into his work as a figure of wisdom and strength. Though Theseus was not the central character in most of Sophocles' plays, his presence as a wise ruler was significant. In Sophocles' Oedipus at Colonus, Theseus is portrayed as a symbol of justice and compassion, offering sanctuary to the exiled Oedipus. Here, Theseus is presented not only as a mighty hero, but as a wise and just ruler, a legacy that would inform later representations of kingship and leadership in Greek drama. Aeschylus, another playwright, also included Theseus in his works, though his depiction was often more focused on the moral lessons that could be drawn from Theseus's myth. In works such as The Suppliants, Theseus was presented as a model of virtuous kingship, providing an example of how heroes could balance personal sacrifice with their responsibilities to their people. Theseus was more than just a warrior. He was a leader who embodied civic responsibility, a theme that would resonate through both Greek and Roman political thought. In the Hellenistic period, as the power of Athens began to wane, and the influence of the Greek world spread far and wide, Theseus's image evolved into one of the archetypal figures of heroic endurance. His story of overcoming the Minotaur was taken up by philosophers and poets as a symbol of humanity's struggle to conquer its own fears, both personal and existential. His ability to face challenges, whether they were literal monsters or the complex demands of leadership, became a metaphor for the human condition itself. Even during the Roman Empire, Theseus remained an important figure in the cultural consciousness. The Romans, who admired Greek art and mythology, continued to depict Theseus in their own statues, frescoes, and mosaics. Theseus was seen as a model of Roman virtues, strength, honor, and duty, and his deeds were used to inspire Roman leaders and generals. The Roman poet Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, referenced Theseus's journey, recounting the hero's struggles with both monsters and love, and drawing parallels between Theseus and the Roman concept of virtues, the Roman ideal of manly excellence and courage. Even in modern times, Theseus's myth continues to inspire artists, writers, and thinkers. His adventures have been retold in countless forms of media, from the works of Renaissance painters like Peter Paul Rubens, who painted scenes of Theseus battling the Minotaur, to the modern retellings in literature and film. Theseus is often portrayed as a timeless figure, one who transcends the specific cultural context of ancient Greece and becomes a symbol of the eternal struggle between order and chaos, between the hero's inner demons and his external challenges. The story of the labyrinth itself, where Theseus ventures into the dark, twisting corridors to confront the Minotaur, has been interpreted in numerous ways in literature and philosophy. Some see it as a reflection of the psychological journey of the hero, a journey into the unconscious, where the hero must face his own fears and confront the monster within. This interpretation of the labyrinth as a symbol of the mind and its complexities has influenced writers from James Joyce to Carl Jung, who use the labyrinth as a metaphor for the human condition and the challenges of self-discovery. In many ways, Theseus's journey was also a cultural journey. As Athens transitioned from a city-state to an empire, and as the values of Greek civilization were absorbed into the wider Mediterranean world, the myths of Theseus helped to shape the cultural identity of not just the Athenians, but the entire Greek-speaking world. Theseus was a hero who embodied the Greek ideals of strength, wisdom, and civic duty, values that continued to resonate through the ages and which influenced the rise of Western civilization. Even today, Theseus's image lives on in popular culture. His story of the labyrinth and the Minotaur has been adapted into countless books, movies, and video games. The timeless appeal of Theseus as a figure who combines strength with intelligence, bravery with humanity, continues to captivate new generations. His myth remains a rich source of inspiration for creators who explore themes of heroism, self-discovery, and the struggle against chaos. The tale of Theseus's journey into the labyrinth, where he faced the terrifying Minotaur, is one of the most enduring and iconic myths of ancient Greece. On its surface, it is a story of a hero overcoming an impossible challenge, yet beneath the surface, it is a myth laden with profound symbolism that resonates on both a personal and cultural level. The labyrinth itself, and the monster it housed are symbols that have intrigued scholars, artists, and philosophers for centuries. These symbols continue to evoke a sense of mystery, struggle, and transformation. At its most basic level, the labyrinth in Theseus's myth represents chaos and complexity. The very design of the labyrinth, a vast maze that confuses and entraps those who enter, mirrors the confusion and disorder that the hero must overcome. It is a place where the rules of logic and reason no longer apply, where one is lost in a twisting, disorienting world. To enter the labyrinth is to face the unknown, to confront the chaos that lies at the heart of existence. Theseus's task, then, is not only to slay the Minotaur, but to navigate this complexity, to find a way through the confusion and uncertainty. The labyrinth can also be seen as a symbol of the inner self. In many ways, it represents the mind, the intricate, convoluted paths of our thoughts, desires, and fears. Theseus, as he journeys through the maze, is engaging in a quest for self-discovery. Just as many heroes in myth undergo trials that lead to deeper understanding of themselves. The labyrinth, in this sense, is not just a physical space, but a psychological landscape where Theseus confronts his own fears, doubts, and inner demons. Within the labyrinth, the Minotaur, the half-man, half-bull creature, represents the monstrous forces within the human psyche. Often interpreted as a symbol of primal instincts, violence, and unrestrained desire, the Minotaur stands as a powerful image of the darker side of human nature. In some interpretations, it represents the unconscious, the hidden and often terrifying aspects of the self that lie in shadow, waiting to be confronted. The Minotaur is a force of destruction, but also of transformation. To face it is not just to destroy a monster, but to come to terms with the darker, more chaotic parts of one's own nature. Theseus's victory over the Minotaur, then, is not simply a physical triumph, but a symbolic one. It represents the conquest of chaos, of mastering one's fears, and of achieving a deeper understanding of the self. The slaying of the Minotaur is an act of self-overcoming, in which Theseus faces and defeats the monster that resides within himself. This battle with the Minotaur can be seen as a rite of passage, a moment of transformation that marks a shift from ignorance to knowledge, from confusion to clarity. The labyrinth itself, with its confusing turns and hidden paths, is also a symbol of the complexity of life's journey. In every life, there are obstacles, detours, and moments of uncertainty, and it is through navigating these challenges that one gains wisdom and maturity. The labyrinth is not a place of punishment, but rather a school of wisdom, where the hero learns important lessons about perseverance, courage, and the nature of reality. To emerge from the labyrinth is to undergo a transformation, a rebirth of sorts, as one has faced the chaos and emerged victorious. Another layer of symbolism can be found in the way Theseus navigates the labyrinth. With the help of Ariadne, who provides him with a ball of thread to mark his path, Theseus is able to find his way through the maze. The thread, in this context, symbolizes guidance, clarity, and hope in the midst of confusion. It is a tool that allows Theseus to confront the darkness of the labyrinth without losing his way, a metaphor for the idea that even in the most bewildering and difficult times, there is always something, whether it be wisdom, love, or inner strength, that can guide us toward our goal. The Minotaur, as a creature that embodies both man and beast, also suggests the duality of human nature. It is both civilized and primal, a being that exists between the realms of reason and instinct. This duality is central to Theseus's journey. He must not only defeat the Minotaur physically, but also come to terms with the contradictions inherent in human existence. The monster represents the tension between order and chaos, between civilization and the wild, untamed forces of nature. Theseus's triumph, then, is not only over the beast, but also over the conflict between these two aspects of existence. The myth of Theseus and the Minotaur also carries a more cultural and societal symbolism. The labyrinth, with its intricate and winding pathways, is often seen as a representation of the challenges and complexities of civilization itself. Theseus's victory over the Minotaur can be viewed as a triumph of human reason and order over the chaotic forces that threaten to disrupt society. The slaying of the monster is not just an individual victory, but also a metaphor for the triumph of civilization over barbarism. In this way, the myth reflects the values of Greek society, which placed great importance on the power of reason, organization, and social order. In some interpretations, the labyrinth is also seen as a symbol of fate. The maze is a metaphor for the twists and turns of life, where one must navigate the unknown in order to reach a goal. The Minotaur, as a creature born of the union between Pasiphae and the bull of Poseidon, is a reminder of the unpredictable nature of fate. How human actions and the whims of the gods can lead to the creation of monsters, both literal and figurative. In this sense, the labyrinth can be seen as a metaphor for the challenges that one must face when trying to make sense of the world and one's place within it. Finally, the labyrinth represents the journey itself, the winding, difficult path that all heroes must take in order to achieve greatness. It is a journey fraught with obstacles, but also filled with opportunities for growth and self-discovery. Theseus's ability to navigate the labyrinth symbolizes the hero's journey in the broadest sense, the movement from ignorance to wisdom, from chaos to order, from fear to understanding. To confront the labyrinth is to face the challenges of life head-on and emerge stronger for it. Though Theseus is often remembered for his heroic feats, his role as a ruler is equally significant in his mythological legacy. As the king of Athens, Theseus embodies many of the qualities that were idealized in Greek leadership: strength, wisdom, justice, and courage. However, his leadership was not without its challenges, and his story offers profound lessons on the complexities of power and governance. Theseus's leadership journey begins long before he assumes the throne. As a young man, he is thrust into positions of responsibility, even as he faces trials that test both his physical strength and his moral character. From the moment he chooses to go to Athens and prove himself, Theseus steps into the realm of leadership, not just as a warrior, but as a symbol of what it means to lead by example. His decision to face the dangers of the road to Athens, slaying bandits and helping those in need, sets the tone for his future reign. Theseus is not merely a hero. He is a leader who understands that strength is not enough. Wisdom, fairness, and sacrifice are just as essential. The unification of Attica. One of Theseus's most important accomplishments as a leader was the unification of the region of Attica. Prior to his rule, the region consisted of several independent and often warring city-states. Theseus, through both diplomatic negotiation and strategic conquest, managed to unite them under one banner, forging a singular, more powerful Athens. His leadership in this unification effort set the stage for the rise of Athens as a dominant political and cultural force in ancient Greece. This act of unification was not merely about consolidating power. It was also about creating a sense of collective identity. By uniting the people of Attica, Theseus ensured that the city of Athens would not just be a collection of individual communities, but a unified whole with shared goals and values. His efforts to bind the people of Athens together were as much about fostering unity as they were about political strategy. This vision of a unified state laid the groundwork for the democratic principles that would come to define Athens in the years to follow. The role of wisdom and justice. While Theseus was undeniably a strong and capable warrior, his wisdom and sense of justice were perhaps even more important to his legacy as a leader. The myth of Theseus is full of instances where his ability to make wise decisions, even in the face of temptation and adversity, sets him apart from other heroes. For example, his decision to spare the lives of certain enemies, such as the bandits he encountered on his journey to Athens, demonstrates his understanding of justice and mercy. Theseus also showed his capacity for righteousness when he returned to Athens after his victory over the Minotaur. The city had been under the oppressive rule of the tyrant Peleus, and Theseus's arrival marked a turning point. He overthrew the tyrant and restored a sense of fairness and order to Athens. By doing so, Theseus demonstrated that leadership was not only about power, but about the moral responsibility that comes with it. Righteous governance, one that is just and respects the will of the people, is central to Theseus's model of leadership. However, Theseus's rule was not without its shortcomings. One of the darker aspects of his leadership was his inability to reconcile his personal desires with his duties as king. The most notable example of this was his abandonment of Ariadne. His decision to leave her on the island of Naxos after their escape from Crete revealed his tendency to act impulsively, sometimes driven by his own ambitions and desires rather than the well-being of those he loved. This act of betrayal, though not uncommon among mythological heroes, remains a key moment of moral ambiguity in Theseus's character. In leadership, the line between personal ambition and the responsibilities of ruling can often blur, and Theseus's actions exemplify this tension. His unfortunate mistake with the black sails, the miscommunication that led to his father Aegeus's death, was another example of the unintended consequences of personal actions. These moments serve as a reminder that even the greatest of heroes, despite their wisdom and strength, are vulnerable to mistakes, and that true leadership requires a balance between one's personal desires and the needs of the people. The sacrifices of leadership. Another central theme in Theseus's story is the idea that leadership requires personal sacrifice. His willingness to take on seemingly impossible tasks, such as slaying the Minotaur or navigating the treacherous politics of his city-state, reflects his dedication to his people. As a ruler, Theseus made many personal sacrifices for the greater good. His daring decisions often came with significant risks, and while his success in overcoming these challenges brought great glory to Athens, the personal toll of his actions was heavy. For instance, after the tragic loss of his father, Theseus's grief was deepened by the realization that his personal failings, his failure to change the sails to white, led to the tragedy. This moment of intense personal sorrow illustrates the emotional weight of leadership. Theseus, like many great leaders, was not immune to the consequences of his actions, and the weight of his decisions shaped his legacy as much as his victories did. Moreover, Theseus's leadership was often defined by his ability to inspire others. As a king, he led not just through power, but through the respect and admiration he commanded. His bravery in battle, his willingness to stand for justice, and his role as a protector of the weak made him a figure that the people of Athens could rally around. Theseus's leadership style was not one of tyranny, but of noble sacrifice and inspiration, leading by example rather than by force alone. The tragic end of his leadership. As Theseus aged, his leadership faltered. The later years of his reign were marked by political struggles, both within Athens and with neighboring states. His disillusionment with the complexities of rule and his sense of alienation from the people he once led contributed to his eventual withdrawal from Athens. The decision to leave the city that had once thrived under his guidance speaks to the emotional and psychological toll that leadership can have on a person. Theseus's final days, spent in exile on the island of Skyros, reflect the fragility of power and the inevitable passage of time. Despite all he had accomplished, Theseus's leadership came to an end in a moment of tragic irony. Having once united Athens and brought peace to his people, he met his death in a land far from the city he had once ruled. In this way, Theseus's leadership is a testament to the impermanence of power and the fleeting nature of greatness. Theseus is one of the most celebrated heroes in Greek mythology, yet his myth is filled with both triumph and tragic flaws. The exploration of what it means to be a hero is at the heart of Theseus's story, as his character embodies both the ideal and the imperfect aspects of heroism. Through his deeds, his choices, and his personal struggles, Theseus challenges the traditional notion of the hero and offers a more nuanced understanding of what it means to be a legendary figure. In many ways, Theseus fulfills the traditional traits of a hero: bravery, strength, intelligence, and a willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. He is a classic hero who faces daunting challenges, including the slaying of the Minotaur, the rescue of Athens from tyranny, and the unification of the people of Attica. Theseus's courage in the face of overwhelming odds, especially when he volunteers to face the Minotaur in Crete, establishes him as a hero of the highest order. In his myth, he embodies the heroic virtues that were central to Greek culture: the ability to confront the unknown, the strength to overcome monsters, and the wisdom to navigate difficult situations. One of the most heroic qualities Theseus demonstrates is his selflessness. When he chooses to sail to Crete to face the Minotaur, he is not seeking fame or personal glory. He is motivated by a sense of duty to his people, to Athens, and to the broader cause of justice. His willingness to sacrifice his life for the well-being of others aligns with the archetype of the heroic sacrifice, where the hero's deeds are done not for personal gain, but for the betterment of society. This willingness to put others before oneself is perhaps the core of the traditional understanding of heroism. Theseus also showcases leadership and courage in his efforts to unite the fragmented cities of Attica. By overcoming the divisions that existed among the various city-states and bringing them together under a single political entity, Theseus demonstrates the qualities of a statesman, qualities that are equally heroic. His actions in this regard reflect the ideal of civic responsibility, where the hero's actions extend beyond personal glory to serve the welfare of the state and its people. Through these deeds, Theseus becomes more than just a warrior. He becomes a symbol of collective unity and strength. However, while Theseus is undoubtedly a hero by many traditional standards, his story is far from one of unbroken triumph. Theseus's character is also shaped by moral ambiguity, which complicates his status as a hero. For all his noble deeds, Theseus is marked by his flaws and his failures. His abandonment of Ariadne is one of the most famous examples of his imperfections, as it shows that even the greatest heroes can act selfishly, driven by ambition or desire. Though Ariadne helped him escape the labyrinth, Theseus leaves her behind without a second thought, an act that taints his otherwise heroic narrative. Similarly, Theseus's role in the death of his father, caused by his failure to change the sails to white upon his return to Athens, casts a shadow over his otherwise heroic journey. The tragedy of Aegeus's death is a direct consequence of Theseus's negligence, and it serves as a stark reminder that the choices of heroes, even those made in the pursuit of great deeds, have serious consequences. In this sense, Theseus's heroism is not purely one of perfection, but of imperfection. A hero who is both noble and flawed, who rises to greatness but is never immune to failure. In this way, Theseus challenges the idealized notion of heroism that often pervades Greek mythology. He is not a godlike figure of perfection, but a deeply human hero who experiences moments of greatness alongside his failures. This nuanced depiction of Theseus speaks to a broader theme in Greek mythology, that heroism is not just about slaying monsters and achieving glory, but about grappling with one's own humanity, the limits of power, and the consequences of one's actions. Heroism and personal struggle. Another layer to Theseus's concept of heroism is the internal struggle he faces throughout his life. While the physical challenges he faces are well known, battling the Minotaur, the giant Crommyonian sow, and others, it is his internal battles that add complexity to his character. The emotional toll of leadership, his moments of doubt and guilt, and the burden of his past mistakes weigh heavily on him. Theseus's personal journey is as much about self-confrontation as it is about external heroism. His eventual disillusionment with the world around him, and his inability to reconcile his past actions with his present state of being, reflect the psychological cost of heroism. The transition from youthful idealism to the sobering reality of leadership and responsibility is an essential part of Theseus's narrative. As a young hero, he is driven by the pursuit of glory and adventure. But as he ages, the weight of his past decisions, his relationships, and his role as a ruler begins to erode the idealistic image of heroism. His moments of failure, particularly the loss of his father, reveal the vulnerabilities of a hero who is not immune to the tragic consequences of his actions. Theseus, like all heroes, is bound by fate and the forces of chance, and his struggle to reconcile his heroism with his humanity adds depth to his character. The legacy of heroism. Despite his flaws, Theseus's heroism is celebrated by future generations. His story sets a precedent for later heroes, particularly those in the Greek tragic tradition. Theseus's example influenced the heroes of works by Sophocles, Euripides, and others, who similarly portrayed their protagonists as complex figures caught between greatness and frailty. The tradition of the tragic hero, one who is often undone by his own flaws, is directly linked to the legacy of Theseus. Moreover, Theseus's myth underscores the moral lesson that heroism is not defined by the absence of flaws, but by the courage to confront them. Theseus's mistakes, his abandonment of Ariadne, the death of his father, and his strained relationship with his son Hippolytus, do not diminish his heroism, but add to its complexity. These flaws make him relatable and human, and they reflect the true nature of heroism, that it is not about perfection, but about the willingness to act, to take risks, and to face the consequences of one's actions, both good and bad. In this way, Theseus's myth contributes to the Greek conception of heroism as a moral journey, not just a physical one. The hero must navigate the labyrinth of life, facing not only external monsters, but also the inner monsters of pride, regret, and failure. Theseus's legacy is a testament to the idea that heroism is not the absence of flaws, but the capacity to rise above them and find meaning in one's struggles. As Theseus grew older, his life, once marked by daring feats and heroic victories, became more shadowed by personal tragedy. The death of his son, Hippolytus, would be one of the most devastating chapters in his myth, underscoring the complex interplay between fate, family, and the consequences of one's actions. In this tragic tale, the concept of heroism, so central to Theseus's early life, becomes intertwined with deep familial conflict, guilt, and the tragic limitations of human agency. Hippolytus, the son of Theseus and the Amazonian queen Hippolyta, was raised with a strong sense of honor and chastity. He had no interest in the pursuits of love, preferring instead the purity of his devotion to Artemis, the goddess of the hunt and virginity. In many ways, Hippolytus mirrored his father's own youthful idealism, his dedication to a cause greater than personal desire. But where Theseus had channeled his youth into feats of glory and adventure, Hippolytus chose a more ascetic path, rejecting the temptations of romance and the distractions of mortal life. This devotion to Artemis, however, brought Hippolytus into conflict with his stepmother, Phaedra. Phaedra, the wife of Theseus, had fallen desperately in love with her stepson, an infatuation that grew over time into a destructive obsession. Her feelings, both forbidden and tragic, led her to a dangerous course of action. Unable to control her emotions and overcome by shame, Phaedra accused Hippolytus of attempting to assault her, a claim that would be fatal for both her and her son. Theseus, devastated by the false accusation, turned to the gods for retribution. In a moment of rage, he called upon Poseidon, the god of the sea, to punish Hippolytus. The sea god, bound by his ancient bond with Theseus, answered the call. He sent a monstrous sea creature to terrify Hippolytus's horses, causing them to stampede in terror. In the ensuing chaos, Hippolytus was thrown from his chariot, mortally wounded. His tragic death was a direct consequence of Theseus's decision to trust in the gods for vengeance. The loss of his son weighed heavily upon Theseus's heart. Though the death of Hippolytus was brought about by the machinations of Phaedra's emotions and his own call for divine justice, Theseus could not escape the overwhelming sense of guilt that consumed him. The tragic irony of the situation was not lost on him. He had sought to defend the honor of his wife and restore his own sense of justice, but in doing so, he had inadvertently destroyed his own flesh and blood. This moment of loss marked a turning point in Theseus's life, and he was never the same afterward. The myth of Hippolytus's death is a poignant reflection on the complexities of family, honor, and fate. Theseus's tragic flaw, his willingness to act impulsively, and his reliance on divine intervention led to the undoing of the very thing he sought to protect. His call for vengeance, driven by anger and a desire for justice, only resulted in irreversible tragedy. This, perhaps, is the most tragic aspect of Theseus's heroism. His inability to foresee the far-reaching consequences of his actions, even when motivated by the most noble of intentions. In Greek mythology, the concept of hubris, the dangerous overstepping of human limits, often plays a central role in the downfall of even the greatest heroes. Theseus's actions in the death of Hippolytus can be seen as an expression of this flaw. By invoking Poseidon's wrath, Theseus acted beyond the bounds of human reason, trusting in divine retribution without fully considering the ramifications. The gods, ever capricious, may have answered Theseus's plea, but their intervention did not offer the justice he sought. Instead, it brought about tragedy, illustrating the limits of human agency in a world governed by fate and divine will. The death of Hippolytus also casts a shadow over Theseus's legacy. Though his earlier heroism had won him renown, it was now overshadowed by the pain of his loss. His reputation as a leader, a conqueror, and a protector of Athens would forever be linked to the tragic end of his son. Theseus's journey from hero to tragic figure reflects the broader theme in Greek mythology, that even the greatest of heroes must confront their own mortality, their flaws, and their regrets. Yet, in the Greek tradition, no hero's story is ever fully closed. After Hippolytus's death, Theseus did not sink into despair forever. As a man of action, he eventually returned to Athens, though his heart was forever broken. In his later years, Theseus's myth would be marked by a sense of weariness, a recognition that his actions, though they had shaped the course of history, had also left deep wounds. The hero who had once united the cities of Attica and confronted the great monsters of myth was now left to grapple with the emotional and personal consequences of his life. The death of Hippolytus, like the tragedies of so many other Greek heroes, is a meditation on the fragile nature of human life. It is a reminder that the greatest of deeds, the most valiant of efforts, cannot shield one from the sorrows and losses that are inevitable in life. The myth does not offer a simple moral lesson, nor does it provide easy answers. Instead, it reflects the complex, often contradictory nature of heroism itself, the interplay of great deeds and great costs, the pursuit of glory, and the inevitable loss that comes with it. As Theseus reflects on the death of his son, his journey grows increasingly somber. The weight of his past actions, the burdens of leadership, and the scars of his personal tragedies would continue to shape his legacy. His myth, like those of many Greek heroes, is a reminder that heroism is never without its shadows, and that even the greatest of heroes must confront the consequences of their choices, both good and bad. And so, Theseus's journey continues, not with the same youthful vigor that once marked his exploits, but with the quiet understanding that heroism, in all its forms, is shaped as much by loss as by victory. The final years of Theseus's life are marked by a quiet, melancholic reflection on his once glorious past. Having accomplished feats that many could only dream of, slaying the Minotaur, uniting the cities of Attica, and establishing himself as a hero in the eyes of his people, Theseus now faced the reality that all heroes, no matter their greatness, must eventually confront the fading of their power and the passage of time. His story, once filled with triumph and victory, gradually becomes one of loss and diminishing influence. In his later years, Theseus would experience both the physical toll of age and the emotional burden of his earlier decisions. In many ways, Theseus's final years reflect the inevitable decline of heroism in the mortal world. The once vibrant hero, who had once commanded armies and slain monsters, was now an aging ruler. Yet, even in his diminished state, his legacy continued to loom large over the land of Athens and beyond. Theseus's name, once synonymous with courage and strength, became immortalized in the stories passed down through generations. His deeds would forever remain a central part of the mythic landscape of Greece, not only as a testament to heroism, but also as a reminder of the inevitable passage of time. The fall from greatness is a theme that often emerges in the myths of the ancient world, and it is no different in the case of Theseus. In his later years, his kingdom of Athens, once united under his leadership, began to experience political turmoil. His own actions and the moral complexities of his rule played a significant role in the difficulties that befell the city-state. The unification of Attica, once a shining example of Theseus's greatness, now appeared more fragile as factions began to grow within the city. Political divisions, even under a hero's reign, were an unavoidable reality, and Theseus's inability to navigate this complexity left his legacy increasingly vulnerable. Moreover, as Theseus aged, he found himself facing the disillusionment that often accompanies the passage from youth to old age. The world had changed, and the idealistic vision of heroism that had once guided him now seemed distant. Theseus had lived through a world of monsters and divine intervention, where gods played an active role in human affairs. But in his later years, the gods seemed distant and indifferent, leaving the hero to face the challenges of life without their aid. The same gods who had once guided his hand in battle now appeared cold and silent. The end of Theseus's rule is often marked by his exile from Athens, a final tragedy in a life filled with both glory and sorrow. According to various accounts, Theseus was betrayed by his own people, cast out from Athens after his reign had become less stable. The details of this exile vary across sources, but the core idea remains the same. The hero who had once led the city to greatness was now rejected, abandoned in his time of need. In one version of the myth, Theseus seeks refuge in the island of Skyros, where he is eventually killed by Lycomedes, the king of the island. Some accounts suggest that Theseus's death was a result of treachery, while others claim that it was an accident or a tragic misunderstanding. Whatever the cause, the death of Theseus marks the end of an era in Greek mythology. The hero who had once embodied the ideals of courage, strength, and wisdom was now gone, leaving behind a legacy that would endure long after his physical death. Though he was no longer present to defend Athens or to lead his people, Theseus's influence continued to be felt, and his memory would live on through the stories and myths that his fellow Greeks told for generations. Theseus, in his final years, became a symbol not only of heroism, but of the impermanence of even the greatest of mortals. Theseus's death also holds an important place in the narrative of Greek mythology, as it serves as a reminder of the inevitable fate that awaits all heroes. In the context of Greek tragedy, heroes are often destined to experience a fall from grace, whether through their own actions or through the capricious will of the gods. Theseus, despite his many triumphs, was not immune to this fate. His death was not the heroic battle or glorious end that many might have expected. Instead, it was a quiet and painful departure from a world that had once celebrated his deeds. Yet, even in his death, Theseus's legacy remained intact. His myth would continue to inspire future generations of heroes, both in Greece and beyond. The themes of his life, selflessness, the complexities of heroism, the consequences of one's actions, would resonate in the works of later writers and philosophers. In many ways, Theseus's story reflects the Greek understanding of the hero's journey, a cycle of greatness, decline, and death, followed by an enduring legacy that transcends time. The way in which Theseus's story has been passed down through history speaks to the deep resonance of his character and his myth. Even today, the name of Theseus is synonymous with heroism, and his deeds are still remembered in modern retellings of Greek mythology. Whether through literature, art, or popular culture, Theseus remains one of the most enduring figures in the mythological canon. His myth, like that of many great heroes, offers valuable lessons not only about courage and strength, but also about the fragility of human existence and the complexity of human nature. In the quiet reflection on Theseus's final years, there is a sense of melancholy, but also a recognition of the cyclical nature of life. The hero who once overcame every challenge and stood as a beacon of hope and strength eventually had to come to terms with his own mortality. And in doing so, Theseus's story becomes one of reconciliation, a coming to terms with the impermanence of both human life and heroic achievement. His tale is a reminder that, while heroes may fall, their stories continue to live on, shaping the world long after their deaths. As the myth of Theseus concludes, we are reminded that the greatest heroes are not those who remain unchanged by time, but those whose stories continue to inspire and resonate with generations to come. Theseus's life, though marked by both greatness and tragedy, remains a testament to the enduring power of myth and the timeless nature of heroism. His legacy, both flawed and magnificent, is a part of the greater tapestry of Greek mythology, a legacy that will continue to be woven into the stories of those who come after him. The death of Theseus, though sorrowful, is not an end, but a transition. His journey, his trials, and his ultimate legacy will continue to shape the world of myth for centuries, and his name will forever be etched into the annals of heroic history. The myth of Theseus, though marked by personal tragedy and human flaws, would go on to have a lasting and profound influence on the city of Athens and on the larger Greek cultural landscape. Even in his later years, as his rule began to falter and his personal life took tragic turns, the impact of his deeds was felt in the very foundation of Athenian identity. Theseus became more than just a heroic figure. He evolved into a symbol of civic pride, unity, and the ideals of the city-state itself. In the centuries following Theseus's death, the Athenians continued to revere him as one of their greatest champions. His name was celebrated in numerous rituals, monuments, and myths that underscored the enduring nature of his legacy. The very act of founding the city of Athens was credited to Theseus, for it was he who had united the disparate villages of the region of Attica, transforming them into a cohesive political entity. In this sense, Theseus was not just a hero in the traditional sense of slaying monsters and overcoming obstacles, but a political founder, a unifier whose vision of a united Athens would live on long after his death. One of the most significant ways in which Theseus's legacy was commemorated was through the celebration of his deeds in annual festivals. The most notable of these was the Theseia, a festival held in honor of the hero in Athens. This celebration, which occurred every year, included athletic games, sacrifices, and public displays of reverence for Theseus's contributions to the city. The festival was not only a way to honor his accomplishments, but also served as a reminder of the civic virtues that Theseus embodied. Virtues such as bravery, selflessness, and the desire to unite others for the greater good. Theseus's connection to Athens was also expressed through the erection of monuments and statues in his honor. One of the most famous of these was the statue of Theseus, which stood in the heart of Athens. The statue depicted Theseus in the prime of his strength, symbolizing the heroic potential that lay at the core of Athenian identity. It was said that the statue's gaze was directed toward the sea, a reminder of the hero's journey to Crete and his role in securing the safety and glory of Athens. This image of Theseus, standing tall and unyielding, became a powerful symbol of Athenian pride and resilience. Another important aspect of Theseus's legacy was his portrayal in Athenian art and drama. The myth of Theseus was a common subject in both sculpture and painted pottery, and his image was often used to symbolize the heroic ideals of the city. The story of the Minotaur, perhaps the most famous of Theseus's adventures, was frequently depicted in these mediums, emphasizing his courage and cunning. Theseus's battle with the Minotaur was not merely an act of physical prowess. It was seen as a triumph of intelligence over brute force, a key quality that the Athenians valued deeply. His clever use of the thread to navigate the labyrinth became a symbol of reason prevailing over chaos, a theme that resonated strongly with the intellectual and philosophical climate of Athens. In the dramatic arts, Theseus's life and adventures were frequently reimagined and retold by playwrights. His story was featured in the works of the great dramatists, including Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus. These playwrights often took liberties with the myth, adapting it to reflect contemporary themes, but the core elements of Theseus's heroism and tragedy remained constant. Theseus's encounters with divine forces, his moral complexities, and his struggles with fate became central themes in Athenian drama, offering audiences a glimpse into the tension between human agency and the uncontrollable forces of destiny. In particular, Theseus's role as a leader and founder became a focal point in the literature of Athens. His leadership in the unification of Attica was an inspiring tale, and many playwrights used his story as a way to explore the responsibilities of rulers and the sacrifices that leadership entails. The idea of the hero king, someone who must navigate both personal ambition and the needs of his people, was central to these interpretations of Theseus. His struggles, both internal and external, offered valuable lessons about the complexities of governance and the consequences of one's actions. The legacy of Theseus also took root in the philosophical discourse of Athens. In the centuries following his death, philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle would reflect on the nature of heroism, morality, and leadership through the lens of Theseus's life. Theseus's virtues, as well as his flaws, were examined in these intellectual traditions, offering a model of the tragic hero who rises to greatness but is ultimately brought down by his own imperfections. The lessons drawn from Theseus's life continued to shape Athenian thinking about ethics, governance, and the role of the individual in society. Despite his flaws and his eventual fall from grace, Theseus was ultimately remembered as one of the foundational figures in Athenian myth and culture. His myth reflected the values of the city-state, the pursuit of unity, the triumph of reason over chaos, and the recognition that even the greatest heroes are subject to the whims of fate. His story was not one of unchecked glory, but rather one of growth, struggle, and redemption. Theseus's tragic end, marked by the loss of his son and his eventual exile, only deepened his resonance in the cultural memory of Athens. His life became a symbol of both the nobility and the fragility of human existence. The impact of Theseus's myth extended beyond Athens, however. His legend was known throughout the Greek world, and his heroic feats were adopted and adapted by other city-states and cultures. Theseus became, in many ways, a pan-Hellenic hero, his story spreading from the shores of the Aegean to the farthest reaches of the Greek-speaking world. While his ties to Athens remained the strongest, his influence was felt throughout the broader Greek cultural sphere. His myth was retold and reshaped in various regions, with each telling reinforcing the core values of heroism, sacrifice, and the complexities of human nature. Through art, literature, philosophy, and ritual, the legacy of Theseus became an integral part of Greek cultural heritage. His name lived on in the very fabric of Athenian society, and in the minds of those who looked to his myth as a model of how to navigate the struggles of life. In the end, Theseus's legacy was not merely a collection of heroic feats, but a profound reflection on the nature of heroism itself. His myth continues to resonate today, a reminder that even in the face of immense challenges and personal flaws, a hero's journey is one that can inspire, teach, and endure through time. The myth of Theseus stands as one of the cornerstones of Greek mythology, and its influence can be seen in the evolution of heroic archetypes throughout the ancient world. While many heroes in Greek mythology followed a traditional pattern, Theseus's journey presents a distinct narrative that blends both the classical hero's journey and more complex, nuanced elements that reflect the shifting values of Greek society. Over time, Theseus's story influenced how later generations would perceive heroism, molding the expectations of what it meant to be a hero and how one's actions would be interpreted by both the gods and society. In the traditional Greek heroic narrative, a hero was often defined by the completion of great labors, the slaying of monsters, and the eventual achieving of immortal fame. Theseus, like Heracles and Perseus, partook in such deeds, but his story is also marked by the incorporation of leadership, political unification, and the exploration of personal morality. While his accomplishments on the battlefield, slaying the Minotaur and defeating the Crommyonian Sow, certainly defined him as a mighty hero, the more enduring aspects of his legend stem from his role as a leader and a statesman. His actions, particularly in the unification of Attica and his foundation of the city-state of Athens, represented a new kind of heroism, one that transcended the mythological notion of the solitary warrior and embraced the responsibility of governance and civic duty. This shift in Theseus's myth reflects the growing importance of civic and political leadership within Greek society. By the time Theseus's legend was firmly established in the mythological canon, Athens itself was undergoing a transformation into a powerful and influential city-state. The values of democracy, unity, and collective governance were becoming more pronounced, and Theseus's role as a unifier of the scattered towns and villages of Attica mirrored the ideals that the Athenians were striving toward in their own society. As such, Theseus became not only a hero in the traditional sense, but also a symbol of civic virtue and collective strength. Where earlier heroes, like Heracles and Perseus, were often isolated figures who accomplished great deeds for personal glory or out of divine necessity, Theseus's story places a strong emphasis on the collective good. His heroism is not merely about individual triumphs over monsters or adversaries, but about the unification of a fragmented people. He sought to bring together the disparate communities of Attica under a single banner, and in doing so, he fulfilled a role that went beyond that of a warrior. He became a symbol of Athens' future, a founding figure whose legacy would endure in the political and cultural fabric of the city. The concept of heroism itself also evolves in Theseus's myth, particularly when we examine the tensions between personal ambition and the demands of the larger community. Throughout his life, Theseus displays characteristics of the tragic hero, someone who struggles against fate and often fails to fully understand the consequences of their actions. In many ways, Theseus embodies the Greek tragic hero's journey, where the hero's flaw leads to their undoing. His abandonment of Ariadne, his strained relationship with his father Aegeus, and the death of his son Hippolytus all contribute to a deeper understanding of heroism as a complex, often imperfect pursuit. Unlike other heroes who are more purely defined by their triumphs, Theseus is a hero whose flaws, his rash decisions, his moments of moral ambiguity, and his inability to foresee the consequences of his actions become just as integral to his myth as his victories. This complexity was not lost on later generations of Greeks. The tragic elements of Theseus's story would influence the development of the Greek tragic hero in literature and drama. The heroes of playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides often reflected the internal conflict and moral struggles seen in Theseus's myth. For instance, the notion of hubris, excessive pride or arrogance leading to downfall, is deeply embedded in Theseus's story. His reliance on divine aid, as well as his missteps in dealing with family and political matters, highlight the tension between human agency and the will of the gods, a theme that would become central in later Greek tragedies. Theseus also influenced the way in which heroism was portrayed in later literature and philosophy. The ideal of the tragic hero, marked by both greatness and fallibility, would resonate in works by philosophers such as Aristotle, who defined the tragic hero as someone whose downfall is a result of their own errors in judgment. Theseus's tragic flaws were emblematic of this notion. His abandonment of Ariadne, which led to a loss of love and respect, and his tragic responsibility for the death of his son, Hippolytus, were acts that led to the erosion of his own moral standing. The downfall of Theseus, particularly his final years in exile, became a key touchstone for understanding the complexity of heroism and the human experience in a way that was both relatable and timeless. The heroism of Theseus is not just about deeds of physical strength or courage. His myth reflects an understanding of heroism as an evolving and multifaceted concept, one that requires wisdom, foresight, and a constant balancing act between individual ambition and the needs of others. It is not surprising, then, that Theseus's myth would come to define the type of hero celebrated in the city-state of Athens. In a society where civic duty was central to identity, the hero who could unite a people inspire loyalty, and guide them toward a shared future was as important, if not more so, than the hero who simply defeated monsters or overcame personal challenges. Later generations of Greeks would look to Theseus as a model not only for bravery in the face of monsters, but also for leadership in the face of adversity. His complex legacy, a mixture of greatness, flaw, and redemption, set the stage for the development of heroic ideals in the Hellenistic period and beyond. Whether in the political arena or in the literary world, the story of Theseus would serve as both a cautionary tale and an inspiration, teaching that heroism was not just the pursuit of glory, but the acceptance of responsibility, the reckoning with one's mistakes, and the enduring impact of one's actions. Through his adventures and his eventual fall from grace, Theseus became a hero whose influence extended far beyond the boundaries of Athens. His legacy shaped the way heroism was understood throughout the Greek-speaking world, and his myth would continue to inspire both writers and leaders for centuries to come. In the myth of Theseus, we see not just the triumphs of a singular individual, but the formation of the very ideals that would define the future of the Greek heroic tradition. The myth of Theseus, though deeply intertwined with the identity of Athens, also plays an essential role in the larger context of Greek heroic ideals. In many ways, Theseus's story helps to define the qualities that were esteemed in Greek society: strength, intelligence, bravery, and an unwavering sense of duty. Yet, his myth also presents a more complex image of heroism, one that reflects the growing awareness in Greek culture of the inherent imperfections within all individuals, even those who are elevated to the status of legend. Theseus's story, with its combination of triumph and tragedy, offers a mirror to the evolving ideals of heroism within the wider Greek world, serving as both a celebration and a cautionary tale. In the context of Greek heroism, Theseus is often compared to other legendary figures such as Heracles, Perseus, and Achilles. These heroes, while all embodying certain ideals of bravery and accomplishment, each serve different purposes within Greek mythology. Heracles, for example, is the archetype of physical strength, undertaking the 12 labors as a means of atoning for his own transgressions. Perseus, on the other hand, represents the clever, strategic hero, defeating the Gorgon Medusa with a combination of wit and divine assistance. Achilles, perhaps the most tragic of all Greek heroes, is known for his martial prowess and his ultimate fate in the Trojan War, where his invincibility and pride lead to his downfall. Theseus, by contrast, is a figure who embodies a broader range of qualities, making him a more complex hero in the Greek tradition. While he is certainly a warrior, his myth is also deeply concerned with themes of leadership, civic responsibility, and the consequences of one's actions. His victory over the Minotaur, for instance, is not merely an act of physical strength. It is a reflection of Theseus's intelligence as he uses the thread given to him by Ariadne to navigate the labyrinth, demonstrating that heroism is not only about brute force, but also about wisdom and foresight. Theseus's myth is marked by a deep sense of duty to his people, and his leadership in uniting the fragmented cities of Attica speaks to a more civic-oriented understanding of heroism. Furthermore, Theseus's character arc introduces the notion that heroism is not always synonymous with perfection. His mistakes, his abandonment of Ariadne, the death of his son Hippolytus, and the tragic outcome of his relationship with his father Aegeus serve to humanize him in a way that other heroes of Greek myth are not always portrayed. These flaws are not merely incidental, they are central to his story. In this respect, Theseus represents the Greek ideal of the tragic hero, a figure who is both great and deeply flawed, who rises to greatness but is ultimately undone by his own actions or circumstances. This is a marked departure from earlier heroic traditions, where the hero's greatness is often unquestioned and immutable. The myth of Theseus thus mirrors the Greek understanding that heroism, while noble and significant, is also a deeply human endeavor. Greek heroes were often not demigods like Heracles, but mortal men and women who faced immense challenges, both physical and emotional. Theseus's myth reflects this duality as he contends with external enemies and creatures of myth, but also wrestles with personal flaws, moral dilemmas, and the consequences of his actions. His imperfections, in fact, make him a more relatable and human figure in the context of the Greek heroic tradition. The notion of heroism as both an individual and collective pursuit is another crucial aspect of Theseus's myth in the larger framework of Greek culture. Greek heroes, particularly those from the Homeric epics, often act alone or are part of a warrior band, fighting for personal honor or to achieve individual glory. In contrast, Theseus's greatest accomplishments are intertwined with his role as a leader of the people of Athens. His unification of the scattered cities of Attica and his role in the defense and glory of Athens highlight the broader social dimensions of heroism. Theseus's success is not solely about his own victory, but about what he can do for his people. His leadership reflects the growing importance in Greek society of the hero who serves as both an individual champion and a figure of collective significance. In this way, Theseus stands apart from other heroic figures whose stories focus primarily on personal triumph. This emphasis on the communal aspect of heroism would influence later Greek ideals, particularly in the development of civic virtues and the concept of the good ruler. The idea of the hero as a leader who must balance personal ambition with the welfare of the state would resonate in later periods of Greek history, especially in the philosophical works of Plato and Aristotle. For Plato, the ideal ruler was someone who combined both wisdom and moral integrity, and he often referenced heroes like Theseus as exemplars of this ideal. Theseus's myth, in this sense, becomes a touchstone for Greek thinking about leadership, justice, and the responsibilities of power. Additionally, Theseus's relationship with the gods offers a nuanced view of divine interaction with mortals. While the gods frequently intervene in the lives of heroes, Theseus's myth illustrates the limitations and dangers of such divine aid. Theseus's reliance on the gods for assistance, particularly his call for vengeance upon his son Hippolytus, illustrates the Greek belief that mortals, despite their nobility, could never escape the capriciousness of the divine. The gods may offer help or punishment, but they do not guarantee success or happiness. Theseus's tragic moments are, in part, a result of this divine interference, which serves as a reminder that the hero's journey is always fraught with the unknown and the uncontrollable. The myth of Theseus also contributes to the ongoing dialogue about the nature of fate and free will in Greek thought. Throughout his life, Theseus strives to shape his own destiny, but his story ultimately underscores the limitations of human agency. While he may have been a great hero, he was still subject to the whims of fate and the consequences of his actions. This tension between human will and the forces of destiny is central to many Greek myths, but it is especially evident in Theseus's journey. He makes decisions that seem to be driven by moral principles or civic duty, but these decisions often lead to unforeseen tragedies. In this sense, Theseus's story is a meditation on the complexities of choice and consequence, offering a more nuanced view of heroism than the traditional tale of the invincible warrior. As we reflect on Theseus's role in the wider context of Greek heroic ideals, we see that his myth represents a shift in the way heroism was understood in ancient Greece. He is not simply a paragon of strength or wisdom, but a figure who encapsulates the tension between greatness and fallibility. His story challenges the notion of the flawless hero and invites the Greek audience to consider the full complexity of what it means to be a hero. Theseus, with his blend of triumph and tragedy, serves as both a model of heroic potential and a cautionary tale about the limits of human achievement. The story of Theseus, though deeply rooted in the mythology of Athens, had far-reaching consequences that extended well beyond the confines of the city-state. His adventures, leadership, and legacy served as a foundation for understanding heroism in the ancient Greek world. Theseus's influence can be seen in the myths of later heroes, whose stories were shaped by the ideals and lessons presented in his own. Whether through the depiction of courage, the struggle with fate, or the emphasis on civic duty, Theseus's journey would leave an indelible mark on the heroic archetypes that followed. One of the most notable ways in which Theseus influenced later Greek heroes is through the themes of leadership and unity. The unification of Attica, which Theseus accomplished by bringing together the disparate city-states under a single banner, became an ideal of governance and collective identity that later heroes and rulers would strive to emulate. The idea of the hero as a unifier, someone who not only vanquishes foes but also brings people together for a common purpose, became a key feature of subsequent mythic and historical narratives. For example, in the myths of Heracles, the great hero whose 12 labors were undertaken to redeem himself, we also see an emphasis on a hero who serves a greater purpose than personal glory. While Heracles' journey is focused on individual feats of strength, many versions of his myth also portray him as a protector of the people, much like Theseus. In later versions, Heracles is shown not only as a warrior, but also as someone who helps to establish order, justice, and unity among the Greek cities and their people. This aspect of Heracles' character bears a strong resemblance to Theseus's leadership in Athens, where the city's unity was a central theme of his heroic deeds. Similarly, Perseus, who defeated the Gorgon Medusa and undertook other great quests, also bears the influence of Theseus's heroic characteristics. Though Perseus's myth is more focused on individual quests and the attainment of glory through supernatural means, his return to Greece with the head of Medusa is framed as an act that benefits the greater community. The hero's victory brings peace, justice, and the restoration of order, themes that resonate with Theseus's own role in preserving the well-being of Athens. Theseus's influence on Perseus's myth is seen in the focus on the hero's civic-mindedness, even when performing acts of individual valor. The role of Theseus as a leader who prioritizes the welfare of his people also laid the groundwork for later Greek depictions of kingship and rulers. Heroes who were not only warriors but also statesmen emerged as central figures in the myths that followed. Jason, the leader of the Argonauts, is an example of a hero who navigates the balance between personal ambition and the broader responsibility to his people. Jason's journey, while focused on his quest for the Golden Fleece, is also marked by the responsibility he feels as the leader of his crew. In this sense, Jason shares many qualities with Theseus, as both are depicted not merely as warriors, but as leaders whose actions carry consequences for their entire community. Another hero shaped by the example of Theseus is Achilles, the greatest of the Greek warriors in the Iliad. Though Achilles is often seen as the embodiment of individual glory and martial prowess, his narrative also speaks to the consequences of leadership and the impact of one's actions on others. Achilles' withdrawal from battle and his eventual return to fight in the Trojan War reveal the tension between personal pride and the needs of the collective. These themes echo the moral and emotional struggles that Theseus faced in his own myth, particularly when he grappled with the consequences of his abandonment of Ariadne and the tragic death of his son, Hippolytus. Achilles' story, much like Theseus's, emphasizes that heroism is not simply about victory in battle, but about understanding the broader responsibilities of one's actions. In addition to influencing individual heroes, Theseus's myth had a profound effect on the portrayal of the hero's relationship with the gods. Throughout Theseus's life, his interactions with the gods are complex and often fraught with difficulty. He receives help from gods such as Athena and Poseidon, yet he also faces their anger and indifference. This tension between divine assistance and divine interference in the hero's fate became a central theme in later Greek mythology. For example, Heracles' relationship with the gods was defined by a similar push and pull. He was favored by some gods, like Athena and Hermes, who provided him with guidance and tools to complete his labors. But he was also constantly beset by the whims of Hera, who sought to destroy him at every turn. Much like Theseus, Heracles' myth reflects the idea that divine aid is not always a guarantee of success, and that even the greatest of heroes must face trials and adversities beyond their control. The tragic elements of Theseus' story, his reliance on divine power to exact vengeance upon Hippolytus, leading to unintended consequences, also influenced later narratives of gods and heroes in Greek myth. Theseus' own flaws, notably his moments of moral ambiguity and rash decisions, became a defining feature of later heroic figures. While earlier heroes such as Perseus and Heracles were more straightforward in their actions, the growing awareness of the complexities of human nature in Greek society led to a deeper exploration of the flaws of mythological figures. The tragic dimension of Theseus' life, his failure to foresee the consequences of his actions, his moral missteps, and his inability to reconcile the ideal of the hero with his human limitations, became a model for later tragic heroes. For example, Oedipus, the tragic hero of Sophocles' play, exemplifies the themes of fate, hubris, and tragic flaw that are also evident in the story of Theseus. Oedipus's downfall, brought about by his own actions and the unknowable workings of fate, mirrors the complex interplay between human agency and divine will that Theseus faced throughout his life. The tragic element of Theseus' myth, wherein even the greatest hero must face the repercussions of his decisions, paved the way for later Greek tragedies that explored the fatal flaws of heroes who were, in many ways, just as fallible as their fellow men. Theseus's influence on Greek heroes extends beyond mere narrative connections. His mythological arc also influenced the cultural understanding of what it meant to be a hero in Greek society. His story brought forth the idea that heroism is not an immutable or unchanging quality. Heroes could rise to greatness, but they were also bound by the same limitations, imperfections, and moral complexities that define all of humanity. As such, Theseus stands as a pivotal figure in the history of Greek heroism, his myth continuing to shape the conception of heroism long after his story was first told. The myth of Theseus, with its complex layers of triumph, failure, and moral struggle, became an enduring symbol not only in the realm of literature and art, but also in the world of Greek philosophy. Philosophers, particularly in the classical period, engaged with the tales of Theseus as a means of exploring the nature of heroism, leadership, and the relationship between the individual and the state. In many ways, Theseus's myth serves as a lens through which Greek thinkers examined the virtues and flaws inherent in human nature and the responsibilities of those who rise to positions of power. One of the key philosophical interpretations of Theseus's life centers around his role as a leader and the ethical dimensions of his decisions. Unlike many of the more solitary heroes in Greek mythology, Theseus is not simply a figure of individual glory. His story is deeply connected to the well-being of his people, particularly the city-state of Athens. His unification of the scattered communities of Attica and his leadership in defending Athens from external threats were pivotal moments in his myth. Yet, these actions also raise important questions about the moral responsibilities of a leader and the consequences of their choices. The philosopher Plato often explored the idea of the ideal ruler, someone who would embody wisdom, justice, and virtue. In his work, The Republic, Plato presents a vision of the philosopher king, a ruler who governs with reason and serves the greater good of the state. Though Theseus is not explicitly mentioned in Plato's works, his myth provides an early model for this ideal. Theseus's efforts to unite the people of Attica and lead them toward a common purpose reflect the qualities of a just ruler who seeks to create harmony among his subjects. However, the tragic aspects of Theseus's story, particularly his rash decisions, such as abandoning Ariadne and causing the death of his son Hippolytus, serve as a cautionary tale about the limitations of human leadership. The hero who appears virtuous on the surface can still make grievous errors, and the consequences of these mistakes can be far-reaching. Theseus's leadership challenges the notion of the perfect ruler and brings to the forefront the idea that even those who hold great power are still subject to the complexities and imperfections of the human condition. In this light, Theseus can be viewed as a tragic hero in the philosophical sense, a figure who embodies the tension between human ambition and the realities of leadership. His story suggests that no leader is beyond reproach, and that the choices they make are fraught with moral ambiguity. In the same vein, Aristotle, in his work Nicomachean Ethics, discusses the concept of virtue and the importance of achieving a balance between extremes. The Greek idea of virtue is often framed as the golden mean, the moderation between excess and deficiency. In the case of Theseus, his actions can be seen through this lens of virtue and excess. While his courage and sense of duty to Athens align with the virtues of bravery and justice, his flaws, His impulsive decisions and failure to reflect on the consequences of his actions represent the excesses of pride, hubris, and rashness. Theseus's abandonment of Ariadne, for instance, demonstrates the dangers of excess in desire and ambition. He acts on impulse, leaving behind the woman who had helped him escape the labyrinth. In doing so, he fails to balance his sense of duty with the emotional and moral obligations to those who aided him. His actions also raise questions about the role of personal relationships in the life of a hero. Theseus's treatment of Ariadne, his abandonment of her in the moment of victory, speaks to a lack of consideration for the human aspects of heroism, something that could be interpreted as a failure in achieving moral virtue. Moreover, Aristotle's concept of phronesis, practical wisdom, can be applied to Theseus's leadership and decision-making. Practical wisdom involves the ability to make sound decisions in complex situations, considering not just the immediate outcome, but the long-term effects on both oneself and others. In this regard, Theseus's failure to exercise phronesis is evident in several key moments of his myth. His abandonment of Ariadne, his reckless vengeance against his son Hippolytus, and his failure to change the sails to white, which resulted in the tragic death of his father, are all decisions that reflect a lack of foresight and practical wisdom. The consequences of these actions highlight the importance of tempering courage with careful judgment, a lesson that would resonate deeply with later Greek philosophers and thinkers. The tragic nature of Theseus's myth also touches on the concept of fate and free will, central themes in Greek philosophy. The tension between the hero's actions and the will of the gods is a recurring theme in Theseus's life. His quest to confront the Minotaur, his attempts to shape the political future of Athens, and his tragic mistakes all occur against the backdrop of divine influence. Theseus's reliance on the gods, whether through invoking Poseidon's vengeance or seeking divine aid in battle, demonstrates that even the greatest of heroes are not free from the interference of fate or the whims of the gods. This relationship between divine will and human agency was a point of philosophical debate among Greek thinkers. The Stoics, for example, believed that humans should align their will with the natural order and accept the role of fate in their lives. In this view, Theseus's failures could be seen as a result of his failure to understand the natural order of things and the limits of his own power. His impulsive actions and reliance on divine intervention highlight the tension between human desires and the inevitability of fate. In contrast, Epicurean philosophers would argue that free will plays a central role in determining a person's happiness. From this perspective, Theseus's downfalls might be seen as the result of his own choices, driven by a lack of self-control and understanding of his own limitations. Ultimately, Theseus's life serves as a profound exploration of the moral and philosophical dimensions of heroism. His story raises critical questions about the responsibilities of leadership, the nature of virtue, and the complexities of human decision-making. Though Theseus is celebrated for his great deeds, his life is also marked by tragic flaws and missteps that underscore the fragility of even the most heroic figures. The philosophical implications of his myth continue to resonate, offering timeless lessons on the nature of heroism, virtue, and the human condition. Beyond his heroic feats and civic achievements, Theseus held a significant place in the religious life of Athens. As a foundational figure in the city's mythology, he was not only a symbol of political unity and heroism, but also a divine protector, a link between mortals and the gods, and a central figure in the religious rituals and practices that defined the identity of the city. Theseus's myth was not merely a set of stories told to celebrate his deeds. It was deeply interwoven with the spiritual and cultural fabric of Athens, influencing its religious practices, festivals, and sacred sites. One of the most important religious aspects of Theseus's legacy was his role as the protector of Athens. In the mythology, Theseus is frequently depicted as the city's defender, both against external threats and against internal chaos. His slaying of the Minotaur, for instance, was not merely a heroic victory over a monstrous creature. It was a triumph that ensured the safety and future of Athens. The Minotaur, a symbol of tyranny and disorder, represented a force that threatened the stability of the city-state. By defeating the creature, Theseus restored order and reaffirmed Athens's place as a beacon of justice and civilization. In this sense, Theseus was seen as a patron figure for the city, embodying the virtues of courage, justice, and sacrifice. As protector of Athens, he was invoked in religious rituals and prayers, especially in times of war or political unrest. His myth provided the Athenians with a model of virtuous leadership, someone who combined the qualities of a warrior, a statesman, and a protector. Theseus's presence in the religious imagination of Athens thus served to reinforce the civic ideals that the city-state held dear: unity, strength, and the defense of freedom. In addition to his role as protector, Theseus was also deeply embedded in Athenian religious practices, particularly through the festivals that celebrated his memory. The Theseia, an annual festival in his honor, was one of the most significant events in the Athenian calendar. Held in the city's agora, the Theseia was a time for the people of Athens to come together in both celebration and remembrance. The festival included athletic competitions, sacrifices to Theseus, and public ceremonies that reflected his importance not only as a mythical figure, but also as a central part of Athenian civic identity. The celebration of Theseus at the Theseia was a way to honor his role in shaping the city's greatness. It was not just a time for recalling his physical feats, but also a time to reflect on the moral and civic virtues that he embodied. Theseus's leadership in uniting the cities of Attica and his efforts to protect Athens from tyrants were central themes in the festival's rituals. The Theseia served as a reminder to the citizens of Athens of their shared responsibility to uphold the values that Theseus's myth represented: courage in the face of adversity, a commitment to justice, and the unity of the people. The religious significance of Theseus's myth extended beyond the Theseia to other aspects of Athenian life. His image appeared in various temples, statues, and sacred spaces throughout the city. One of the most famous representations of Theseus was the statue placed in the agora, which depicted him as a young and powerful hero, symbolizing the city's strength and vitality. This statue, along with other depictions of Theseus, helped to anchor his place in the religious consciousness of the Athenians. As they gazed upon his image, the people were reminded not only of his physical prowess, but also of his role as a unifier and protector. In addition to the physical representations of Theseus in the city, his name was invoked in religious prayers and oaths. Theseus was considered a powerful figure whose favor could bring protection and success to the city. During times of war or political crisis, the Athenians would seek his divine intervention, praying for his guidance and support in battle. In this sense, Theseus was more than just a mythic hero. He was a divine force, actively engaged in the lives of the people. His role in Athenian religion underscores the belief that the gods, and those who were divinely favored, could shape the fate of the city. The sanctuary of Theseus, located just outside the city, was another important religious site dedicated to the hero. This sanctuary served as a place of worship and pilgrimage, where the people of Athens could come to offer sacrifices and prayers in honor of their patron hero. The sanctuary, with its altars and statues, was a focal point of religious devotion, and it provided a space where the Athenians could come together to celebrate their shared heritage and values. The sanctity of the space reflected Theseus's enduring presence in the lives of the people of Athens, who saw in him a divine protector and a symbol of their civic identity. Theseus's role in Athenian religion was also marked by his connection to the divine world. Though Theseus was a mortal hero, his myth was deeply intertwined with the gods, and he was often depicted as a favored son of the gods. His close relationship with the goddess Athena, in particular, was central to his religious significance. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warfare, was a patron deity of Athens, and her connection to Theseus reinforced his status as a hero who embodied the civic virtues that were important to the city-state. The myth of Theseus's birth, which involves the divine intervention of Poseidon and Athena, further cemented his role as a figure whose power and authority were granted by the gods. In some versions of his myth, Theseus is even depicted as a demigod, the son of Poseidon, which further elevates his status within the religious framework of Athens. This divine heritage served to reinforce the idea that Theseus was not merely a mortal hero, but someone chosen by the gods to fulfill a higher purpose. His divinely ordained mission to protect and unify Athens was seen as part of the larger cosmic order, and his actions were understood to be in line with the will of the gods. The integration of Theseus into the religious and spiritual life of Athens demonstrates how deeply his myth was intertwined with the civic identity of the city-state. He was not only a symbol of heroism and leadership, but also a divine figure who embodied the values and virtues that the Athenians held dear. His legacy, both as a mortal hero and a divine protector, continued to shape the religious landscape of Athens for generations. Through the festivals, temples, and sacred spaces dedicated to him, Theseus remained an enduring presence in the lives of the Athenians, a hero who connected them to their past and to the divine forces that shaped their future. The myth of Theseus, deeply embedded in the Athenian consciousness, continued to evolve and influence literature and culture well beyond the classical period. As centuries passed, Theseus's story would not only be retold, but would also take on new dimensions, reflecting changing cultural values, political shifts, and philosophical inquiries. From Hellenistic adaptations to Roman interpretations and even Renaissance depictions, Theseus remained a central figure whose legacy was continually shaped by the societies that inherited his myth. One of the most significant ways in which Theseus's myth endured was through its incorporation into later literature. In the Hellenistic period, when Greek culture spread throughout the Mediterranean, Theseus's adventures were retold in a way that reflected the intellectual currents of the time. Apollonius of Rhodes in his epic poem Argonautica, provides an example of how Theseus's myth interacted with the broader tradition of heroic literature. In his version of the Argonaut's quest, Theseus is briefly mentioned alongside other legendary figures, contributing to the collective sense of heroism in the Greek mythic tradition. However, it was in the Roman era, with the rise of Roman literature and the works of Ovid and Virgil, that Theseus's myth truly began to be reinterpreted for new audiences. Theseus was woven into the fabric of Roman mythology, where he was often portrayed as a symbol of Roman virtues such as duty, sacrifice, and courage. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, for example, Theseus's romantic escapades, especially his love for Ariadne, are explored in depth. Ovid's portrayal highlights the tension between Theseus's heroic stature and his personal flaws, particularly in his abandonment of Ariadne, a theme that would resonate across generations as a poignant symbol of human fallibility. Virgil's Aeneid, which sought to forge a connection between the legendary past of Greece and the future glory of Rome, also echoed themes from Theseus's myth. Theseus's role as a leader and unifier was seen as a precursor to Roman ideals of governance, where the fate of nations was often shaped by the actions of singular heroes. The story of Theseus, as a hero who forged unity, resonated with Virgil's vision of Aeneas, the Trojan hero who would go on to found the Roman people. The emphasis on the collective over the individual, present in both Theseus's myth and the Roman foundation story, was a theme that helped carry the legend of Theseus forward into the broader Mediterranean cultural sphere. In addition to literature, Theseus's myth continued to live on in art and architecture throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. Roman mosaics, sculptures, and painted frescoes frequently depicted scenes from the myth of Theseus, often focusing on his battles with monsters and his triumphs in the labyrinth. These artistic representations helped to cement his status as an iconic figure of heroism in the Roman imagination. Roman emperors, eager to draw parallels between their own reigns and the golden age of mythic heroes, often invoked the image of Theseus as a symbol of strength, order, and divine favor. As the medieval period unfolded, Theseus's myth underwent a subtle transformation. The rise of Christianity and the decline of classical polytheism altered the way that heroes like Theseus were understood. However, Theseus's legend, like those of other Greco-Roman heroes, was not entirely forgotten. His story found a place in medieval allegories and chronicles, where his feats were sometimes interpreted in moral or religious terms. While the focus shifted away from his pagan origins, his qualities as a leader, a protector, and a symbol of justice remained compelling. Medieval authors often used Theseus as a model of chivalric virtue, embodying the ideals of knighthood and the pursuit of moral excellence. The Renaissance, a period of renewed interest in classical antiquity, saw the resurgence of Theseus in both art and literature. The humanist movement, which sought to revive the ideals of classical Greece and Rome, brought Theseus's myth back into the cultural forefront. Renaissance writers such as Boccaccio and Petrarch looked back to ancient myths as sources of inspiration and moral lessons. In particular, Theseus's relationship with Ariadne was reimagined as a symbol of love, loss, and the complexities of human desire. The myth was also explored as a metaphor for the tensions between duty and personal happiness, a theme that resonated deeply in the humanist intellectual climate. The arts during this period also reflected a renewed fascination with Theseus. In painting and sculpture, the hero was depicted in dynamic and emotional ways that emphasized his heroic stature, but also his internal conflicts. Titian and Giorgio Vasari, both influential figures in Renaissance art, produced works that explored these themes. In these depictions, Theseus was no longer just a figure of physical strength, but a complex character whose internal struggles were as important as his external victories. Moving into the modern era, Theseus's myth continued to inspire writers and artists. In literature, his myth was adapted and reinterpreted by authors like James Joyce and Albert Camus, who explored the deeper philosophical and existential implications of his story. For Joyce, Theseus's journey into the labyrinth served as a metaphor for the human condition. Endless searching, confronting the unknown, and ultimately grappling with the complexity of existence. Camus, in his work on the absurd, may have found resonance in Theseus's tragic flaws and the consequences of his actions, interpreting them through the lens of human vulnerability and the struggle for meaning in an indifferent universe. In contemporary popular culture, Theseus's myth continues to be a vital source of inspiration. From films to novels and television shows, his story has been retold for modern audiences. The figure of the hero who embarks on a dangerous quest, confronts monstrous adversaries, and faces personal tragedy remains timeless, illustrating that Theseus's myth has transcended its ancient origins to become a story for all ages. Whether as a central character in modern retellings of Greek myths, or as a symbol of the complexities of heroism, Theseus remains a cultural touchstone. In addition, the enduring appeal of Theseus's myth can be seen in modern theatre and opera, where his story has been adapted in ways that blend the ancient with the contemporary. Works like The Minotaur by Robert William Service, or adaptations in modern dance and multimedia. Performances have reimagined his adventures in the context of today's society, continuing to explore the themes of identity, sacrifice, and human fallibility that were central to his original myth. Through these various adaptations, Theseus has become more than just a figure from Greek mythology. He has become a symbol of the ongoing human quest for meaning, a hero whose struggles resonate in the hearts and minds of all who seek to understand the complexities of life. From ancient Athens to modern-day stages, Theseus's legacy endures, ever shifting and ever relevant, speaking to the timeless human experience. The myth of Theseus is perhaps most famously defined by his journey into the labyrinth and his battle with the Minotaur. This episode, one of the most iconic in Greek mythology, is rich in symbolism and offers a deep insight into the themes of heroism, knowledge, and the struggle between order and chaos. The story of Theseus and the Minotaur is not just a tale of physical bravery, but also an exploration of psychological and moral complexities that resonate deeply with the human experience. The labyrinth, a vast and intricate maze constructed by the craftsman Daedalus under the orders of King Minos of Crete, represents a space of entrapment, confusion, and disorder. It is an architectural marvel designed to contain the Minotaur, a half-human, half-bull creature born from the union of Minos's wife, Pasiphae, and a bull sent by Poseidon. The Minotaur itself symbolizes the primal, monstrous forces within the human psyche, desires, passions, and irrationality that are often hidden beneath the surface of rational, ordered society. For Theseus, the labyrinth represents a challenge not just of strength and courage, but of wisdom and strategy. It is a test of his ability to navigate the chaos of the world, to confront the darker, more chaotic forces that lurk beneath the surface of civilization. The labyrinth, in its complexity, mirrors the complexities of life itself, an intricate web of choices, moral dilemmas, and unforeseen consequences. The hero's journey through the maze can be seen as a metaphor for the process of self-discovery and the struggle to make sense of a confusing and often hostile world. The labyrinth also represents the unknown, an environment where reason and logic are insufficient to navigate. When Theseus enters the maze, he is armed not only with physical strength, but with intelligence and foresight, a quality that is often central to his portrayal as a hero. Theseus's use of the thread given to him by Ariadne to find his way out of the labyrinth shows that heroism is not only about defeating enemies in battle, but also about the ability to overcome complex challenges through ingenuity. The thread, which represents the guiding thread of reason and moral clarity, is what allows Theseus to navigate the chaotic maze and eventually defeat the Minotaur. It suggests that the way out of chaos and confusion is through wisdom and careful planning, not just brute strength. The Minotaur, the monstrous creature at the heart of the labyrinth, is a figure that embodies both physical and moral chaos. The Minotaur's very nature, half man, half beast, symbolizes the conflict between reason and primal instinct. While human civilization is based on rationality and order, the Minotaur represents the untamed forces of nature and the repressed aspects of human nature that civilization seeks to suppress. Theseus's battle with the Minotaur can thus be interpreted as a confrontation with these dark and uncontrollable forces within both society and the individual. The Minotaur's role in the myth extends beyond being a mere monster to slay. It represents the hidden, often destructive elements of the human condition. In mythological terms, the Minotaur is a reminder of the dangers of unchecked desire and the consequences of straying too far from moral order. Its existence in the labyrinth suggests that such forces are often hidden, lurking in the shadows of the human psyche, and that it takes great courage and self-awareness to confront them. The hero who defeats the Minotaur, as Theseus does, is one who triumphs over the base and irrational aspects of life, reasserting the power of reason, virtue, and civilization. At a deeper level, the Minotaur's defeat marks a moment of moral cleansing, the restoration of order from chaos. Just as Theseus's journey through the labyrinth represents a process of navigating life's challenges, his victory over the Minotaur symbolizes the hero's triumph over the more chaotic and destructive forces that threaten to undo the fabric of society. Theseus, in overcoming the Minotaur, embodies the idea that heroes are not just warriors in the traditional sense, but also individuals who can restore balance to a world out of sync. The symbolism of the labyrinth and the Minotaur also speaks to the relationship between civilization and nature. Theseus's task of entering the labyrinth and defeating the Minotaur can be understood as a metaphor for the broader struggle between civilization and the wild, untamed forces of nature. The city-state of Athens, with its emphasis on reason, democracy, and order, represents the apex of civilization, while the labyrinth, and by extension the Minotaur, represents the forces that threaten to disrupt this order. The story reflects the belief that civilization must confront and tame the wild forces of nature, but also acknowledges the danger of those forces when they are repressed too harshly. The myth of the Minotaur also reflects the idea of human sacrifice and the consequences of violence. In the original version of the myth, the people of Athens are forced to send 7 young men and 7 young women as tribute to King Minos in Crete, where they are to be sacrificed to the Minotaur. This sacrificial aspect of the myth emphasizes the role of sacrifice in the maintenance of social order. And Theseus's victory over the Minotaur can be seen as a symbolic end to the need for such sacrifices. By defeating the Minotaur, Theseus ends the cycle of bloodshed and offers a new beginning for the people of Athens, one free from the terror of the monstrous forces that had once controlled them. Moreover, Theseus's journey through the labyrinth and his battle with the Minotaur speak to the hero's initiation, the process by which the hero passes through a difficult, often transformative trial in order to achieve maturity and wisdom. For Theseus, this trial marks his passage from a youthful, idealistic hero to one who confronts the deeper, more difficult aspects of life. His victory over the Minotaur, then, is not just a personal triumph, but a rite of passage, an act of maturity in which he confronts the darkness within both himself and the world. This process of self-confrontation and moral growth is an essential part of what it means to be a hero in Greek mythology. In summary, the labyrinth and the Minotaur in Theseus's myth are deeply symbolic elements that offer insight into the nature of heroism, knowledge, and the struggle between order and chaos. The journey through the labyrinth represents the difficult path of self-discovery and moral clarity, while the defeat of the Minotaur symbolizes the victory of reason over primal instinct and chaos. Theseus's triumph is a reflection of the broader theme in Greek mythology that heroes are not just warriors who slay monsters, but individuals who confront and overcome the darker aspects of life, restoring balance and order in the process. The myth of Theseus, like those of many heroes in Greek mythology, is deeply entwined with themes of fate, moral complexity, and the inevitable consequences of human choices. While his earlier life is filled with heroic deeds, triumphing over the Minotaur, uniting the cities of Attica, and being a symbol of Athenian pride, his later years reflect the tragic dimensions of heroism. Theseus's story is not simply one of glory and success, but of human frailty and the deep, often painful consequences of the choices that heroes make. The tragic flaws of Theseus become more pronounced in his later years, revealing that even the greatest of heroes are not immune to the consequences of their actions. His life, though marked by tremendous acts of courage and wisdom, is also marked by profound errors that ultimately tarnish his legacy. The abandonment of Ariadne, for instance, is one of the most infamous acts in Theseus's myth. After Ariadne helped him escape the labyrinth by giving him the thread that would guide him out, Theseus, once victorious, left her behind on the island of Naxos without a second thought. This act of selfishness, spurred by a desire to pursue his own glory and ambitions, was not only a moral failure, but also the beginning of a series of missteps that would lead to his ultimate downfall. The abandonment of Ariadne is emblematic of Theseus's internal struggles and his inability to balance the responsibilities of heroism with the human need for compassion, love, and loyalty. Theseus's personal desires often overshadowed his obligations to others, and this flaw becomes a recurring theme throughout his myth. The decision to leave Ariadne behind would haunt him, as she would later play a significant role in his fate. Ariadne's abandonment is not just a personal betrayal, but a tragic reflection of Theseus's moral complexity. The hero is not only someone who triumphs, but also someone who makes mistakes that cannot be undone. Another deeply tragic aspect of Theseus's story is his involvement in the death of his father, King Aegeus. According to the myth, when Theseus set out on his journey to Crete, he promised his father that he would return with white sails to signal his victory over the Minotaur. However, in his excitement and pride, Theseus forgot to change the black sails to white, a seemingly small mistake with catastrophic consequences. When Aegeus saw the black sails, he assumed that his son had perished in the labyrinth, and, in his grief, threw himself into the sea, ending his own life. The death of Aegeus is one of the most poignant and tragic moments in Theseus's myth. It highlights the tension between human agency and fate, a theme that runs throughout Greek mythology. Theseus's failure to honor his promise to his father, however inadvertent, led to a series of events that culminated in tragedy. In this sense, Theseus's heroism is not one of perfect actions, but one that reflects the complexities of human choice. Even the greatest heroes can make mistakes with far-reaching consequences. This moral ambiguity is an essential part of Theseus's character and a key aspect of his legacy. Furthermore, the death of Theseus's son, Hippolytus, adds another layer of tragedy to his life. Hippolytus, who had been devoted to the goddess Artemis and rejected the advances of his stepmother Phaedra, was wrongfully accused by her of attempting to assault her. In an attempt to avenge the insult, Theseus prayed to Poseidon, asking for divine punishment, and Poseidon sent a sea monster to cause Hippolytus's horses to panic, leading to his death. This tragic event is made all the more poignant by the fact that Theseus's decision to act in anger without fully understanding the consequences led to the loss of his son, a loss that he would never be able to undo. The death of Hippolytus is an echo of the tragic decisions that Theseus had made earlier in his life. It is a reminder that even the most well-intentioned actions can lead to unforeseen, irreversible consequences. In many ways, the story of Hippolytus's death reflects the theme of hubris, the tragic flaw of excessive pride or overconfidence that appears frequently in Greek tragedy. Theseus's failure to see the larger picture, to consider the impact of his actions on those he loved, ultimately leads to his most personal and devastating loss. Theseus's later years, marked by these tragedies, are also characterized by his exile. Having once been a hero who united the cities of Attica and led Athens to greatness, Theseus found himself cast out by his own people in his old age. The precise reasons for his exile vary in different versions of the myth, but it is generally agreed that he was removed from power and forced to live out his final days in obscurity, far from the city he had once ruled. Some accounts suggest that Theseus was betrayed by his allies, while others indicate that his political and personal flaws contributed to his downfall. The fact that the once great hero ended his life in exile serves as a powerful symbol of the transient nature of power and glory. The exile of Theseus is one of the most poignant aspects of his story. It reflects the Greek belief that fame and power are fleeting, and that even the most celebrated figures are subject to the forces of time, change, and mortality. Theseus's fall from grace is not simply a personal tragedy, but also a reflection of the larger philosophical themes that permeate Greek mythology. the inevitability of fate, the consequences of human decisions, and the tragic dimensions of heroism. In the final stages of Theseus's life, he ultimately dies in Skyros, an island where he had sought refuge. The exact circumstances of his death vary, but many accounts suggest that he was either betrayed or killed by King Lycomedes, whose motivations are unclear. Some sources say that Lycomedes, fearing the return of Theseus's popularity and power, pushed him from a cliff, while others suggest that his death was accidental. Regardless of the exact cause, the end of Theseus's life is tragic in its ambiguity. His death marks the final fall of a hero who had once embodied the ideals of bravery, justice, and leadership, but whose later actions led to the unraveling of his legacy. Theseus's tragic endings serve to underline the moral complexity of his myth, and the idea that heroism is not an unblemished, unwavering quality. The true nature of heroism, as Theseus's life reveals, lies not in the perfection of one's actions, but in the ability to navigate the challenges of life, to confront one's own flaws, and to live with the consequences of one's choices. The tragedy of Theseus is a reminder that even the greatest heroes must face their vulnerabilities and ultimately confront their mortality. As we come to the end of Theseus's mythic journey, we reflect on the profound impact this hero has had on both the ancient world and on the stories that continue to shape our understanding of heroism, morality, and human nature. Theseus's tale, filled with triumphs and tragedies, offers a nuanced view of the hero's journey, one that does not shy away from the complexities of leadership, the weight of choices, and the inevitable consequences of human imperfection. From his early adventures in defeating the Minotaur and uniting the cities of Attica, to the darker chapters of his life marked by abandonment, personal loss, and exile, Theseus's story is a poignant reminder that even the greatest heroes are shaped by their flaws and limitations. His myth teaches us that heroism is not simply about glory or greatness, but about facing the challenges of life with courage, wisdom, and an understanding of our own vulnerabilities. Though Theseus's life may have ended in tragedy, his legacy lives on in the culture, art, literature, and philosophy of both the ancient and modern worlds. His story continues to inspire us, reminding us that the true essence of heroism lies not in perfection, but in the willingness to confront both our personal battles and the challenges of the world around us.